Good morning, everyone. My name is Janet Rutledge. I'm the MLA for Burnaby North and the chair of the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services, a committee of the Legislative Assembly that includes MLAs from the government and opposition parties. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today in Richmond, which is located on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsawwassen, and Kwantlen nations. This acknowledgement takes on special significance today as we honor the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The establishment of this day is one of the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to honor survivors, families, and communities and ensure public commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools, the last of which remained open until 1996. Institutions that by definition were designed to destroy an entire people's way of life. Over the last several months, we have been confronted with the atrocities of residential schools, as unmarked graves of children have been found at former residential schools across the country. The unmarked graves of 215 children at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, followed by hundreds more at other schools in BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, brought these atrocities to the forefront of our collective attention. However, for survivors, for Indigenous families, and communities, the graves are confirmation of the experiences, stories, and trauma they have been speaking about, sharing, and living for generations. About families who were separated, children who were forbidden from practicing their language and culture, children who disappeared or ran away, and children who were abused and mistreated. Individually and collectively, we all have a responsibility to learn about residential schools and the legacy of colonialism and the systemic racism, discrimination, and injustice that is directly linked to the ongoing trauma, inequities, and challenges that Indigenous peoples continue to experience. I hope all British Columbians will take some time today and every day to listen, to learn the truth, to reflect, and commit to reconciliation, and to teach and encourage others to do the same. I would now like to invite members of the committee to introduce themselves and make any additional reflections, starting with Deputy Chair Ben Stewart.
Well, thank you, Chair, for those very thoughtful comments. My name is Ben Stewart, and I'm the MLA for Kelowna West, which is located in the traditional territories of the Syilx and Okanagan peoples. I acknowledge the grief that Indigenous peoples, families, and communities have been experiencing as a result of residential schools for generations, and more acutely over the last several months as unmarked graves have been and continue to be confirmed at former schools in BC and across Canada. In this time of grief, we recognize that there is so much more to be done on the path to meaningful reconciliation. It is vital that we come together as a community to both acknowledge the immense loss and the dark legacy of residential schools and listen to Indigenous voices as we work together for a better future. All Canadians have a responsibility to listen, learn, and grow from these grim reminders of our past in order to create a more inclusive, respectful, and equitable tomorrow for everyone who calls our communities home. Today, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation marks one more step in the process of reconciliation. I encourage all British Columbians to take the opportunity today to honor the children lost, the survivors, their families, and to participate in learning and commemoration events. This is one day in a journey that will be long, but one we take together. As allies, as leaders, and as British Columbians, we must actively raise awareness and provide space to support Indigenous peoples, families, and communities to be heard and to heal. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Harvinder Sandhu, MLA for Vernon-Monashee, and I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Okanagan Indian Nations. Today, on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I would like to share a few words to reflect on this day. We recently witnessed the findings at residential school sites across the province and country, which have been a stark reminder of the atrocities experienced by thousands of innocent Indigenous children and families, and the harms that continue to be felt to this day. One of the first discoveries was at the former residential school in Kamloops. My thoughts are with the Kamloops and Teshwapmak nations and all the other nations, including Okanagan Indian nations, who are deeply affected by these discoveries. It is our collective duty and responsibility to come together to stand in solidarity to support Indigenous communities as we work our way to a place of healing. I honor the leadership, resilience, and strength of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples throughout British Columbia and across Canada. It is the time to reflect and learn more about the history and ongoing legacy of residential schools, and to have these important conversations with our families, our friends, and communities about how we can all bring action to reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples in BC. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike Starchuk, the MLA for Surrey-Cloverdale, which is located on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, which include the Semiahmoo, Katzie, and Kwantlen First Nations. September 30th, Orange Shirt Day, is our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The recent findings made across the province and country have brought the truth of the atrocities of the residential school system fully into the light. I was at the vigil in Victoria after the 215 unmarked graves of young children were found. The stories that were told are forever etched into my mind and my soul. That day brought out the real truth of what was taking place. And the following day, and I'll personalize this, a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who considered himself lucky as not to be a scoop baby. I started working with Wayne as a volunteer firefighter 40 years ago, and it was those events that brought a new light to how he shaped his entire life and how he was going to move it forward. So today, when we see these orange shirts, remember all of those children who didn't make it home, and how the truth of how they didn't make it home never leaves us, and how every child does in fact matter. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Greg Kylo. I'm the MLA for Shuswap, and I come from the traditional territory of the Secwepemc-speaking peoples. On today, the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, I just want to send out my condolences, my well wishes, and my hope for a brighter future for all British Columbians and all Canadians. I hope that everyone across the province will join us in recognizing this very important day and listening to the Indigenous voices, working towards meaningful reconciliation, and seriously thinking about how we can shape a better future by working to achieve equality and prosperity for all.
My name is Megan Dykeman. I'm the MLA for Langley East, which resides on the traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Today is Orange Shirt Day and the first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Today is an important day to reflect upon the history of the residential school system and the harms that continue to be felt to this day. Today is a day to come together and reflect on what we can do to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples to build a better future for every child, for all of our children. In my riding, there are events to mark this important day, which provide opportunities to listen and learn. I encourage all to take the time to find and attend one of these events in working together towards meaningful reconciliation.
Good morning to all of you. I'm Jagrup Broad, MLA of Surrey Fleetwood. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that I come from the traditional territories of Montano, Semiahmoo, and KC people. This is a historic day. The recent findings at the residential school sites across the province and country have been a stark reminder of the atrocities experienced by Indigenous children and families and the harms that continue to be felt to this day. As a father of 2 young children, it is hard to believe and shocking for me that these children were stolen from their families to teach English and to make them Christians and to take Indian out of them. It is really shocking. The federal government has designated now, September 30th, a new national day for truth and reconciliation, responding to a call to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The province of British Columbia is also responding to a call from the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation by joining with Indigenous partners and allies to light the province orange today. More than 24 buildings and landmarks in community throughout the province will light up orange today, September 30th, including the Legislature, Robson Square, the Wood Innovation Design Center in Prince George, and BC Place. And we will work with the Indigenous leaders, organizations, and communities on the best and most respectful ways to mark a Truth and Reconciliation Day in BC. Today, we encourage every British Columbian to wear an orange shirt to show that every child matters, and to show our to show our commitment to working together with Indigenous people to create a better future for all of our children, for the province and for the entire country. A future that is fair, equal, and just for all children. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee, for your reflections on this very important day. We will take a short recess before we proceed with the rest of our introductory comments. Okay, thank you, everyone, for your introductory comments in recognition of this very important day. I'll proceed to talk in a bit more detail about how this day, the work of the committee will proceed today. So with respect to today's meeting, we will be hearing our last set of presentations on Budget 2022 consultation. On behalf of all committee members, I would like to thank everyone who has participated in the consultation so far. We have heard over 300 presentations and received hundreds of submissions and survey responses. We encourage everyone who hasn't yet taken the opportunity to have their say and share their priorities on the next provincial budget by 5 p.m. today. To participate, you can visit our website at bcleg.ca/FGS budget. So you still have some time to take the survey or submit a written presentation. We will carefully consider all input and make recommendations to the Legislative Assembly on what should be included in Budget 2022. The committee intends to release the report in November. For today's meeting, all presenters will be making individual presentations. Each presenter has 5 minutes for their presentation, followed by 5 minutes for questions from committee members. All audio from our meetings is broadcast live on our website, and a complete transcript will also be posted. Assisting the committee today are Jennifer Errol, Stephanie Raymond from the Parliamentary Committee's Office, and Amanda Heffelfinger and Simon Delat from Hansard Services. As this is our last day of presentations, I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of the entire committee to recognize the staff who have helped make this consultation happen. Many thanks again to Jennifer, Stephanie, Amanda, and Simon, and also to Mary Newell, Karn Riar, Katie Stickle, Jessie Gordon, Jenny Byford, Mai Nguyen, Jonathan Hamilton, Darren Parfit, Mike Baer, Dwight Schmidt, Billy Young, and the entire Hansard Broadcasting, Transcribing, and Publishing team. So as you can see, it takes a lot of help behind the scenes for us to be able to conduct this kind of consultation. And we thank you all for your expertise, your good nature, your incredible organizing skills. I would also, before concluding, like to make a special mention to Stephanie. We want to acknowledge that after 14 years of helping us with these committees, this is her last committee meeting. She will be moving on to do other things in her life. So let's all thank Stephanie. And so let's call our first presenter of the day. Our first presenter is Karen Ranaletta, representing the Canadian Union of Public Employees, BC Division. So Karen, you have 5 minutes. We will keep time. Jennifer will hold up a card when you have 30 seconds. So that you know it's time to transition into wrap-up comments, and then we'll have another 5 minutes for questions.
Great.
Okay, so whenever you're ready.
Oh, great. I'll start now then. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. On all days, it's appropriate to acknowledge the land or territory in which we stand, and today that's especially important. I'm grateful to be here on the unceded and stolen territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I know that this hearing was scheduled before the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was enacted, and I'm sure, like me, you would rather be joining Indigenous people to honor residential school survivors and to remember those children who never returned home. As you know, QPBC is the largest union in the province. We represent more than 100,000 workers in a wide range of sectors and occupations across the province. So our submission to this committee is equally wide-ranging. I know that you've heard from a number of representatives from CUPE during your hearings. From local activists to members of our provincial executive board, you've heard some of our specific recommendations. In the interest of time, I will also just focus on just a few of our recommendations. There are 35 in total, so I'm not sure how I would get through all of those in 5 minutes. But I encourage you to read our full submission. I know members of the committee will have access to it, and anyone listening can access our full budget submission paper at cupe.bc.ca. So the first recommendation I'd like to talk about is around K-12 education, specifically the issue of daytime custodians. Over the last 2 decades, CUPE custodial workers across the province have raised concerns over the limited day shifts and daytime hours, which is threatening their ability to perform the work they know is vital to maintaining a safe and healthy learning environment for students. We've been reminded during the pandemic just how essential daytime custodians really are to keeping our kids and everyone who works in schools safe. So recommendation number 12, we strongly recommend that sufficient funding be allocated to the K-12 budget to provide for the full reinstatement of daytime custodial staff, to immediately restore adequate staffing levels going forward, and to fund ongoing provision of health protections such as PPE for K-12 custodial workers. You've also heard from other CUPE members, and no doubt many other voices in this province, calling for a continued commitment to the $10 a day childcare plan, and I want to add my voice to that. You'll be hearing much more about childcare from QPBC in the coming weeks and months. It's one of our top priorities over the next year. Now, I don't have kids myself, so childcare isn't something that affects me directly, but the lack of quality, affordable childcare certainly affects many of our members. And after decades of inaction under former governments, this government is doing good work on childcare. Much remains to be done, but we do acknowledge that there has been some good work on it. We think that the most logical solution to the lack of affordable quality before and after school childcare is to bring it into schools. It makes sense. Parents who need childcare just drop their kids off at school before school care, and then after the school, after school, the kids don't need to be shuttled to wherever their childcare provider is. They just stay at school. And like so many ideas, it's almost unbelievable that it hasn't already been done. But that's why we're recommending that Budget 2022 include resources to, and this is recommendation number 17, build a world-class system of early childhood education and care by fully implementing the $10 a day plan, including fully funding school districts to operate childcare in their districts. Finally, I want to talk about post-secondary education. Before I was elected president of QPBC just this past May, I worked at UBC for 14 years. So I could talk about post-secondary education for as long as you like, or longer, or as long as anybody wants to listen, but I'm going to just keep it short. With relatively small investment, the government could bring back living wages to the hundreds or even thousands of people who provide campus support services, mostly women, whose jobs have been contracted out to the same multinationals that benefited from mass privatization of healthcare services under the BC Liberals. It would improve the quality of campus life for students, faculty, and staff. Recommendation number 19 addresses this, and the government recently announced that the thousands of healthcare workers whose jobs were privatized are coming back in-house, and we support that decision 100%, and for many of the same reasons, it should also increase funding for campus services and support bringing back those in-house campus services. So I saw Jennifer hold up the card. That's all we have time for. I really hope you'll take the opportunity to read our full submission and the 35 recommendations we put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Now I'll invite committee members to ask some questions. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Karen, for your presentation. It's unfortunate that we're not doing this live so we could see those orange shoes that you have on right now. My question is about, and it's more about a definition, recommendation 13. You make a comment, eliminate public funding to elite private schools. So can you define for us what the term elite actually refers to?
Yeah, the elite private schools are the St. George's of the world. I mean, we're not the ones that cost tens of thousands of dollars to attend. That's what our researchers have told me.
Okay, just to follow up, because in my writing, there's a number of religious schools that are there, and I just want to make sure that that's not what you would consider an elite school.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Shagru.
Thanks, Karen, for your verbal presentation and also the written, which is very detailed one. 35 recommendations. I think this is the first time I've seen 35 list of recommendations, but it's good to make as long as you can. Much of the stuff you said, we are fully committed. I think whether it's $10 daycare program and some other programs, and there are two areas I would like to ask probably your response, if you can give us more information. One, you have picked up a 75% funding to post-secondary institutions. I heard that question before as well, from another presenter, and I asked the same question, which I'm going to ask you, that, if you can explain, on what basis you picked that number, which is 75% funding to post-secondary institution, and if we go there, how much will it cost to the province, if you have any numbers? So that's one. The second one is, I would like to ask you that you have recommendation 8, which is the immediately implement card check certification.
Yeah.
If you can explain us as to why it's needed, where we are, is there any other province doing it, or where we are in terms of how many unionized workers we have in BC?
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to number 8, which is around card check certification, so BC is one of 2 provinces that does not have it. So in many provinces, once a threshold is met by the number of union cards signed, those workers are considered unionized. In British Columbia, there's a second step to that. So they have to sign the cards, and then after there's I believe it's a 5-day waiting period. I need to double check. Sorry. There is a waiting period between when enough cards have been signed and the application has been filed, and then there's a vote. So we see that this extra step is an extra administrative burden. It's much easier for everybody to recognize that these workers want a union after having enough cards signed in the first place, and that is recognized in almost every province across the country, with the exception of British Columbia and one other.
The last question, you may not have the information about 75% post-secondary institution. That's okay. You can send it later on.
Yeah, we have.
We are right now consulting about the paid sick leave, and I don't see. I skimmed through it very quickly. But do you want to make any comment about that? About
employer-paid sick leave? We are fully supportive of at least 10 employer-paid sick days implemented in employment standards. It's better for the economy, it's better for workers, it is better for employers, and it's better for the health of our communities.
Thank you.
Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we're getting close on time.
Yes, I promise I'll be brief. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Recommendation number 12, where you were speaking in regards to the K-12 budget, having a full reinstatement of daytime custodial staff. In addition, you went further on about PPE for K-12 custodial workers. I'm wondering, in the written submission, you talk about this course of action likely requiring progressive reduction. I was wondering if you could just expand a little bit on where the conversations are in relation to daytime custodial staff, because it has been kind of an ongoing conversation during the pandemic, and then further the rationale below it. Could you just expand a bit on it? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, the conversation about daytime custodians has been ongoing for the past, as long as I've been involved in QB. And it continues to be. I mean, as we all know, there was federal funding that was available for the school districts to access to increase daytime custodial staff, but past any kind of influx of that monies, we don't see where it's going to come from. And so that's why we are advocating that districts keep daytime custodials on. And so I guess because custodial staff often only work in the evenings and the afternoons, that increased cleaning has proven very successful especially during the pandemic, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for kind of an increase in funding to address that shortfall in custodial services past any kind of extra funding that has been made available to the sector.
Just briefly in follow-up, Madam Chair, do you know how many districts currently have daytime custodial staff? Is this ongoing? Yeah,
some do and some don't. I don't have the exact numbers. I can have our research department send that information to you, and as well as MLA Brar, on your question about 75%, we can send some follow-up information.
Thank you.
Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. With respect to the provision of a daycare on school properties, certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm just wondering, is your support conditional upon unionized workforce providing that daycare service, or are you supportive even if it was deemed to be let out to the private sector?
We will always advocate that these be good union jobs. For before and after school care, a lot of our EAs are already qualified to provide this care. They know the kids, they know the work, they know the teachers, they know the spaces, and so for us, it makes sense to deliver the services on school grounds, not just because we want the work, but because it makes it easier for parents, and it also makes it easier to find the workers to do the work.
So your support is conditional upon growing the union?
I would not say that it is conditional on growing the union. I say that we advocate for before and after school care that is delivered by the school districts.
Okay, so you guys would be supportive of the concept of on-site school care even if it was provided by the private sector?
We would like to see a daycare system that is easily affordable and accessible for parents. And our preference, of course, is that our members deliver the work.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more time, Madam Chair?
We're way over time, but our next presenter hasn't come. But I think we do need to be a little cautious about cross-examining.
Okay, no, I was just looking for some clarity,
Okay.
Madam Chair. Thank you. With respect to the 75% funding level for colleges and universities, with the international student population picking up 100% of the cost, for the province to meet 75% funding level, it would also mean that government would also have to provide 75% funding for international students. So I'm just wondering, is the intention of your recommendation that either our colleges and universities would no longer provide education for international students, or are you suggesting that for the province to meet that funding criteria that they would actually provide 75% funding for international students as well?
So our colleges and universities have always had international students. It's not new. It's the increase in using international student tuition to subsidize the lack of funding coming from the province. Many of our institutions are funded at less than 50%, and so using international student tuition seems we're not in favor of gouging folks for the sake of subsidizing what we think the government should be funding.
So is your suggestion then that with the international student population, that the revenues provided by international students would not be part of the equation Because we had a presenter previously making the same argument, but the challenge is that with international students providing 100% of funding or more than, because obviously these college universities are trying to attract and retain international students because it's profitable. Highly profitable for the organization.
And that's it. It's about 100% profit. They recruit all these international students, and international students bring a rich experience to the post-secondary experience, right? However, they don't fund. The institutions aren't funding the extra support services needed for those folks. So, on the face of it, it looks like a cash grab.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. That was a much longer presentation and interaction with the committee than I think you probably expected. But thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the breadth of your recommendations. I think that it reflects the breadth of the work that your members do and the role that they play in our society, and how tuned in they are, and therefore how tuned in their union is to things that you need to flag for us. And we will take your recommendations into consideration and have a really lively discussion about working them into our recommendations. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So we could go right to David. Okay, David, we're ready for you. So our next presenter is David Black, representing Move Up. So David, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. We will signal you when you have 30 seconds. We'll signal you with when you have 30 seconds, so you know it's time to kind of move into wrap-up mode.
Yep.
And then we'll have 5 minutes to engage you with questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I do appreciate being invited here today on the traditional territory of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and particularly the Musqueam peoples. And I do unfortunately want to start with that the fact that you're having this hearing on this very day. I appreciate that all politicians work very, very hard, much harder than the public gives you guys credit for. Your staff and the staff here work incredibly hard. I do appreciate that you're on very, very tight timelines. You have a lot of the public to listen to, but I do want to rebuke the committee for meeting today on the very first National Truth and Reconciliation Day. However, I'll get into this. Move Up represents 12,000 union members in the public and private sector in Western Canada. We are a local of the Canadian Office of Professional Employees Union and a member of several international union federations. In terms of BC's economic recovery, obviously British Columbia, along with the rest of the world, is adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic that is still ongoing. And I would like to say generally our union supports the programs that the legislature and the government have done to support businesses across the province, to support people, communities, and workers across British Columbia. Going forward, these are the principles that the union is suggesting guide your work. First, putting people first. You are the government and you are the legislature representing British Columbia, and it's the people here. Secondly, lasting and meaningful reconciliation for the history of our colonization of this province. Third, to continue on building on meaningful equity and anti-racism initiatives to address the historical injustice for other newcomers to our province. Fourth, to build a better future through addressing the serious crisis that is climate change. And finally, to continue building a strong, sustainable economy that works for everyone in BC. So following up on that, we have a number of specific recommendations. First, to create a new Crown Corporation to retrofit buildings, and we think this addresses a number of the previous points that I've just made. First, it does assist us to meet our climate change targets here in British Columbia and do it in a way that no other jurisdiction that we have been able to see globally has managed to do that. Secondly, that does put a lot of people in British Columbia to work. There's a lot of work that we've identified about $10 billion over 10 years in British Columbia to retrofit buildings of end users of energy across British Columbia, whether that's homeowners, landlords, businesses. We also think that through the work created, we can address some of those other issues around reconciliation and equity and racism and sexism that are particularly have been exacerbated by the pandemic, but of course were existed before, and give people not just make work projects coming out of the pandemic, but in fact careers that they can have for the rest of their lives. We also believe that there's a role for an expanded ICBC. Certainly, I think the discussion around ICBC is very different today than it would have been a few years ago. And we believe that by allowing ICBC to sell insurance to people in British Columbia in other areas of insurance other than auto insurance, most specifically property insurance. We're not suggesting that there should be a monopoly on property insurance, but that it should be a choice that British Columbians have to buy property insurance from ICBC. We think that particularly folks in rural communities don't have very much choice and don't have very many options, and that's one thing that we'd like to see. Third, to invest in childcare, continue investing in childcare to create new and affordable places. My kids are a little bit older than that now, but I certainly know the difference it would have made for our family if we could have had affordable, secure, and public childcare when our 3 children were growing up. And finally, I might even finished early here. Finally, implement a more progressive tax system and reduce the income cap. There we go. So we know that the pandemic has had a very, very a large impact on all British Columbians. Some people have been very, very poorly affected by the pandemic, including members that we represent. But others have done very, very well by the pandemic. And the pandemic has served to exacerbate some of the inequity issues that we saw in British Columbia before the pandemic and around the world. And we think one of the ways to do that is to look at a more progressive tax system going forward to help to redress some of those deficiencies in our economy. So I'll stop there and thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate all the time you guys are putting in to hearing from us. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now we'll invite members of the committee to ask questions. Group and then Megan.
Thank you, David, for coming today to make a presentation. Good to see you here, and also sending us a very well-developed written submission to us. The priority you're indicating, putting people first, lasting and meaningful reconciliation, equity and anti-racism, a better future through addressing climate change and so on. We are fully committed to move forward on these items. I have, you made a recommendation for 4 different issues, so I would like to ask you a question on 2. If you can be very brief, and that's affordability about ICBC and taxation. Mm-hmm. So I know you did mention a little bit about ICBC, but I would like to understand more, like what do you mean by expanding ICBC? And is there any other province which has done this thing? So yes. That's one question. On the taxation system, you're talking about more progressive taxation system and reduce the income gap. If you can a little bit provide more information on that one as well, that would be helpful.
Certainly, thank you. Thank you very much. In terms of ICBC, there are 3 fully public insurance systems in Canada, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and then it's sort of a hybrid system in Quebec. In Saskatchewan, they do exactly what you're asking about. They do have an arm of the Saskatchewan General Insurance Company that sells property insurance and does so in the competitive marketplace. And further, this is something maybe could be looked at down the road. It sells insurance outside the province of Saskatchewan as well. And one of the things that we know about the property insurance market in British Columbia is if you're in one of the metro or regional centers, you probably don't have a lot of issues finding an insurer. And there's pretty good competition there. But in more rural parts of our province, it can be difficult, if not impossible, for people to find insurance for their properties. And we believe not that ICBC should write all of that, but it should be in the market to be able to provide that option to people if they aren't able to find it or to find it at a reasonable price. And so there is a model for that. The Saskatchewan government runs that, and in fact, it's a revenue generator for the Saskatchewan government. So it's a way to generate revenues for the government of British Columbia as well. In terms of our tax system and the priorities that you mentioned, we think that there's more room for that. There were tax increases. I'm a high-income earner. Let me put that on the table. I think I should be paying higher taxes. I can afford it. I did not lose a day of work through the pandemic. And in fact, many of the expenses that I had prior to the pandemic went away. And so my net income, my disposable income increased. I believe for people like myself and people that are wealthier than me, my income stayed the same. Some people's income went way up, depending on what business or industry they're in. I believe that, the phrase that we're all in the same storm together, but we're not necessarily in the same boat. Some people's boats are nice and have gotten a lot nicer since all this. Sorry for the member for Salmon Arm. I've ridden in his boats. But I do believe that the government could do more on that going forward, and specifically in response to the pandemic. So.
I see we're into our last minute, so just a caution. So we have a question from Megan and a question from Ben.
It's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to address very quickly us meeting today. Unfortunately, the inclusion of the holiday, number of days we had to travel, this committee struggled greatly with continuing or not, which would have meant losing a day, like today as it closes. So certainly wasn't an oversight. It's something we tackled and was very difficult, and actually dedicated the first 15 minutes to addressing that and speaking about the impact of truth and reconciliation. So it's certainly a challenging day for us here too. So my question, you have a fantastic submission here, which I've had the opportunity to look through. With the rising insurance costs and the idea of expanding what ICBC offers, I'm wondering, could you just expand a little bit more on what you see that looking like and the benefits?
Certainly. What I think we see from the British Columbia context is, particularly in property insurance, as I said, in rural areas, there's I guess what's called market imperfections, where people have a difficult time there. It isn't really a very competitive market for those consumers, and in some cases they can't buy insurance. So what we're suggesting is that ICBC used to do this originally, is offer competitive in the competitive marketplace the option of buying property insurance from a public insurer. Mm-hmm. The cost structure at ICBC it tends to be a lot lower than private competitors, and so we believe that where that market imperfection exists, there is a space for ICBC to serve British Columbians who either can't afford or can't obtain property insurance at all. And I think the Saskatchewan model offers a good blueprint for that for ICBC on how to do that. I think it's very important to keep separate those lines of business. We shouldn't be seeing cross-subsidization over those things. People in British Columbia are grateful for lower car insurance now. They do not want to see their insurance premiums subsidizing some other line of business, but we believe that there's a market opportunity to provide better and more affordable coverage for British Columbians.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, in the interest of time, Ben has withdrawn his question. We're a little over time. We have a lot of presenters today. So, David, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for coming and presenting to us today. And I guess my reflection would be, our theme is build back better. And we can't build back better if we don't have new ideas. And you've presented us with some new, intriguing ideas that committee members have already engaged in, trying to figure out how to make them work. So thank you very much for stimulating our creative thinking about how to build back better.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and let's keep in touch for sure. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you. And our next presenter is Khair Lalji, representing United Way, BC. So Khair, you have 5 minutes. We will signal when you have 30 seconds left so that you know it's time to move into wrap-up, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions.
Great, thank you very much. At the outset, let me pay homage to this very important day and to the lives lost, impacted, and continue to be impacted to this day, and offer gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, and play on these unceded lands and territories. I also want to acknowledge that members of the Finance Committee will not have received a written submission in advance of today's presentation, but will be sure to submit a written submission by the end of close this afternoon. My name is Khair Lalji. I'm the Provincial Director of Government Relations and Programs with the newly formed United Way of British Columbia, serving BC's interior, Lower Mainland, Fraser Valley, and Central and North Vancouver Island. The United Way of British Columbia exists to drive positive impact and lasting change by strengthening vital connections and delivering resources and supports for the people who need it the most. We aim for a healthy, caring, inclusive community. On behalf of the hundreds of organizations we work side by side with, we want to acknowledge and offer our gratitude to all elected officials and staff for their untiring support for all British Columbians, including and particularly vulnerable British Columbians. We know the pandemic, as well as other socio-political and socio-cultural factors, have shifted the face of vulnerability over the course of the last 18 months. And to this end, in working with a number of organizations and charities across the province, we propose 3 recommendations as it relates to vulnerable children and families. 1, for the province to address the need for a holistic approach to childcare, which would include an expansion of complementary childcare options to support vulnerable families, to circumvent barriers to early childhood development, taking into account the need for various structures, locations, and philosophical approaches in service delivery. 2, for the province to continue to strengthen the partnership and collaboration between nonprofit service providers, private service providers, and public partners in the provision of care outside of school time. And number 3, for the province to invest in culturally safe spaces for children, specifically aimed at key social determinants of health, with a focus on being preventative in nature, with a focus on pro-social behavior, and an emphasis on emotional, cognitive, and social development. Pre-pandemic, vulnerable and marginalized families were struggling to find affordable and safe spaces for their children to go after and before school times. This led to a lack of affordable, accessible, quality programming for marginalized families to develop necessary skills, improve their well-being and self-esteem, keep them safe, and give them a hot meal if that was the only meal they would have for that day. During the pandemic, the need for this has shifted and grown even greater. We know that there are about 330,000 children between the ages of 6 and 12 in British Columbia. We also know that there is an increase in 2-income families, in lone parent families, in sprawling urban settings, all leading to larger commute times for parents and increased discretionary, unsupervised out-of-school time for children. In a study done by the United Way, a finding indicated that children between the ages of 6 to 12 have about 67 hours of discretionary time per week. Most of these children are marginalized, are in poverty, lack adequate and appropriate childcare or supervision, face linguistical and cultural barriers to access, and have physical or cognitive challenges. School-age children in BC also face bullying, lack of sleep, and childhood obesity. Over the course of the last years, United Way has invested in 54,000 spaces for children in the Lower Mainland. We seek to expand that across the province in partnership with communities. We know during the pandemic, all 60 programs continue to operate. We saw a retention of 85% of participants during the pandemic year, of which 1/3 or 33% of the services continue to be offered in person due to the extreme compounding vulnerabilities marginalized children are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Kair. I will now invite members of the committee to ask some questions. Ben.
Kira, thanks very much, and I do look forward to your written notes because just to better understand it. Your first point, the holistic childcare for lower income and marginalized families, can you just, what is your recommendation that be offered, like, is it free childcare or, I mean, $10 a day is what's being offered or being proposed by the government, and are you suggesting that there's another threshold below that that needs to be offered?
The recommendation is on unlicensed out-of-school care programming for vulnerable families in higher risk neighborhoods. So we know that a licensed childcare is one option, but we've heard through many families throughout the province that there's a need for a different type of approach to out-of-school programming. Currently, there are 60 out-of-school programs run in partnership with 60 different organizations, the neighborhood houses, the Boys and Girls Club, the Ys, etc., that offer this type of programming. And the need is to expand this programming outside of the Lower Mainland.
Okay, thanks very much.
Other questions?
I have one question if there's nobody else. Kaher, thank you for coming today. I have, before being elected, worked in the nonprofit sector for quite some time. So you mentioned one of the recommendations you have is strengthening collaboration with the nonprofit and private other partners. Can you explain that to me a bit more as to what it means?
If we think about putting people first, people come from all walks of life. And if you take a look at a child-centered or family-centered approach to care, whether it's education or health care or social care, there are different needs and different platforms that work best for different families. There is a robust private sector that offers opportunities for out-of-school time programming. We know our public partners do that, but we also know that there's the third party or the nonprofit sector that can work with government to help them mandate to put people first. And it's the sharing of knowledge, coming together of best practices to holistically support the vast array of families which this recommendation seeks to do. And so really bringing the three different sectors to the table to have conversations on how best to meet the holistic needs of marginalized families. And we found by speaking with the charities across the province that partnership can be strengthened in many parts of the province.
So are you talking about the families or your focus is more children?
Well, the focus is on providing out-of-school care for children ages 6 to 12. Okay. And by impact, having a preventative impact on their families.
Okay, thank you.
Harwinder.
Thank Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kahir. I don't have question. It's more like comment. I just want to appreciate the work you and United Way does. It's very timely. In Vernon, we're having 20th breakfast drive-through on 7th October. And last year, they've raised $15,000 just for one breakfast drive-through, and then in my community they support more than 20 local charities. So I don't have enough words to appreciate the work that you're doing, the difference you're making, and United Way is making across communities in all over BC. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I do look forward to your written submission. So
Thank you, Emily Sandu. We'll see you on October 7th, hopefully.
Yes, I will be at the legislature, but my staff will be there, and I'll be encouraging people to join that. Thank you.
Prior to this role, I was the CEO of the United Way of Southern Interior, working in that region. Thank you.
Well, Kahir, I'm not seeing any other questions. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for taking the time to come and present to us and make your recommendations. The United Way has a lot of credibility for speaking up on behalf of our vulnerable neighbors and for providing a voice to those who don't have a voice. So your recommendations carry a lot of weight.
Thank you
so
very
much.
Thanks for your time.
And our next presenter is Lonnie Skinner, First West Credit Union. So Lonnie, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. We'll signal you when you have 30 seconds left so that you can shift into wrap-up mode, and then we'll ask you questions.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. As you've mentioned, my name is Lonnie Skinner, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of First West Credit Union. Before I begin my remarks, though, I'd like to acknowledge that First West is headquartered in the township of Langley on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Stolo, Semiahmoo, and Tawasin First Nations. I also want to acknowledge the significance of this day, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Though I am speaking with you right now, the rest of the credit union has closed for the day. At First West, there is an Indigenous Persons Employee Network group, and we are listening to, learning from, and partnering with them for insights and recommendations. They shared with us that closing our doors today is a meaningful way to give all employees additional time and space to honor survivors of residential schools, their families, and their communities, and to learn more about the Indigenous history and culture. I want to thank them for their ongoing guidance, wisdom, and counsel as we seek truth and journey through the path of reconciliation. Because we're closed today, I actually wore my orange shirt yesterday, and for everybody that wore an orange shirt and they posted a selfie, we donated $5.25 per every picture to the Orange Shirt Society. For a limited time together, I've chosen to focus my comments on the opportunity the province has in its upcoming budget to help a small business recovery. We ask that the forthcoming budget identify means to help small business improve productivity measures in order to support job and wage growth, particularly for women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and those who live in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. I believe First West is well positioned to speak to this matter. In fact, 75 years ago, when the banks refused fair credit for self-employed individuals in the farming, fishing, and forestry sectors, these men and women pooled their resources and savings in the spirit of neighbor helping neighbor. Their cooperation created the credit unions who today form First West. And it's incredulous to think, but when banks refuse women credit without their husbands' or fathers' signatures, these women, often entrepreneurs and business owners in their own right, opened accounts and took out loans at First West's founding credit unions. Most recently, when COVID threatened to permanently shut down otherwise healthy businesses in the communities that we serve, First West was among the first financial institutions to respond. Within days of the Canadian Emergency Business Account being announced, First West was ready to receive applications. As of today, we have funded $193 million to more than 3,700 members through the CEBA program. So why am I bringing this to your attention today? At First West, we know that the success of small business in our communities equals the success of the credit union. I would say this is also true for the province. As goes small business in BC, so goes the province. According to the Ministry of Citizen Services 2020 Small Business Profile Report, small businesses account for nearly 98% of the province's businesses. Small businesses provide 53% of private sector employment, and they account for 1/3 of the provincial payroll. What's more, the Ministry's Small Business Profile also states that 40% of self-employed entrepreneurs are women. Small Business BC reports that there's more than 2,000 Indigenous-owned businesses that operate in BC. In First West, we serve about 20,000 BC businesses, roughly 1 in every 25 in the province. We know that when we lift up small businesses in BC, we lift up everyone. When we help small businesses in BC succeed and prosper, we help women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, entrepreneurs, owners, and ultimately employees succeed. There are many ways the upcoming budget can help small businesses improve productivity, but here are 3 for you to consider. The first one, take measures to address labor shortages and labor mobility. First West small business members in agriculture, manufacturing, and skilled trades, as well as service sectors such as law, have shared they are experiencing significant challenges attracting and retaining talent. There's no one fire-sure solution, so we must seek a variety of innovative solutions to improve labor mobility, even in the midst of the COVID health crisis. Second, support and incent robust internship, co-op, and work learning programs. Over the past year, First West has employed more than 20 students through our student hiring program, a mixture of internships, co-ops, and other work learning opportunities. We see tremendous potential in growing this program and know that other small businesses with the support of the government could do the same. And the third suggestion is further invest in communications, technology, and infrastructure for non-urban centres in BC, particularly high-speed internet. This need has been especially made evident during the pandemic. Our members in rural areas of the province had tremendously difficult time accessing banking and investment services, and many of them who are small business owners working from their home were unable to do that because they couldn't access the internet. Add this to the challenges of undertaking at-home learning for children, it really was a challenge. First West's lived experience is serving a diverse membership across the province. We know that productive, healthy, and competitive small businesses ecosystem in BC will create greater opportunities for economic recovery and productivity. Thank you for having me today, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have at this point.
Thank you, Lonnie. Our first question is from Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's wonderful to see you. I know in Langley we're very fortunate to have First West and appreciate and are grateful for all of the support you provide for our community and communities beyond. And as a farmer, certainly appreciate the history and the tradition of the organization. So my question is, there was a fantastic presentation related to intern support. Could you expand a bit on what that looks like? And will you be providing a written submission, not of everything you've said, but of your ideas so that we can see a little bit on how they would be implemented in your vision?
Yes, so absolutely, Megan, I'm happy and we'd be pleased to submit a written submission. As it relates to internships, it could be in the form of incentives. It could be sort of job sharing and costs. It could be helping some of the organizations understand how do you even access some of these co-op programs. We're really fortunate at First West. We do have, we have about 50 people in our human resources department, and we have 2 people that are just dedicated to helping recruit, understand how to access co-op programs through the different colleges and universities. It may not seem like a simple, it is simple, but it's not when you're a small business. Like, how do you do it? So an easy capability, a way to be able to access the different organizations or the different universities is a good start, even having them to have knowledge and access. And then we think having some different incentives for, maybe there's even thresholds if you hire X amount of, or bring X amount of co-op students on, what sort of an incentive would you give back to the business to do that? Because then you would train more people and get more people involved. Those are a couple quick examples.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to whatever you send in and appreciate you taking the time to share these ideas.
Ben.
Thanks very much. Lonnie, I really like your ideas, and I just want to thank you for coming forward today. On the labor shortages, I wanted to understand the mobility part and why there's a barrier with mobility. Like, where does that come from? Can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, and I'll give two examples of mobility, particularly I'll just give the example of the Okanagan with the fruit growers. They really were challenged this year because they often get workers even from Quebec and all across the country. And it became unaffordable, so housing makes a big difference in terms of where a lot of these folks can live. And I'm not suggesting traditional housing opportunities, but maybe even some of these farmers would build properties and build like accommodations if they could maybe have some incentives or capability to come at it from that perspective. So, having places where people can live, help in an affordable way without being just intense in an orchard would be, I think, one part of it. And the second area is that just with immigration, with the shortage of new immigrants coming into the country, a lot of these particular businesses really suffer by not having people. So if there was some way that we could provide, again, some help and support to be part of helping other people's families from other parts of the world be able to sponsor them to be able to come into the country to help for work, that could be a way for mobility as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, and I like your, refocusing on co-ops and, we've done that before, and I know in our business, but sometimes you could just kind of forget about it, and we need to put the spotlight on those, so thanks very much.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. So, Lonnie, I would like to thank you so much on behalf of the committee for presenting to us. And I guess on a personal note, I'd like to say that I am a member of more than one credit union. I think credit unions play a really important equalizing role in our society. And in your presentation, you've just demonstrated that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
And our next presenter is Shira Stewart, BC Gaming Industry Association.
Hi, everyone. I now need glasses. Somehow over the pandemic, I need glasses. Okay, good morning, MLAs. My name is Shira Stewart, and I'm here today as the chairperson of the BC Gaming Industry Association, moving forward the BCGIA. It is also an honor to be here today on National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. The BCGIA was formed in 2015 to act as the unified voice of gaming operators in the province of BC. We've always been proud to engage in this consultation process, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to do so again this year. 2020 and 2021 has been a very difficult time for our members and workers as we navigated our way through the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. Our industry was one of the very few that was mandated closed on March 16th, 2020, and was one of the last included for reopening in Step 3 of BC's Restart Plan, which took effect on July 1st, 2021. This was almost a 16-month closure. Our operators worked extremely hard throughout the pandemic to prepare for a safe reopening. Casinos are among the most highly regulated environments in the province, and as such, are familiar with the implementation and enforcement of strict compliance requirements. All safety protocols in casinos have been adhered to, monitored, and enforced by our floor staff, security and surveillance teams, and casino management. Sophisticated equipment allows surveillance personnel to aid the floor staff in ensuring that patrons are complying with safety protocols. No other industry has the security, surveillance, contact tracing, and oversight capabilities of the casino industry. BC's gaming operator plays a significant role in the provincial economy and their local communities. Gaming facilities include many non-gaming amenities, such as food and beverage outlets, show theaters, conference centers, and hotels. Pre-COVID-19, our members directly employed over 10,000 people in BC and annually paid wages and benefits of more than $300 million and property taxes in excess of $10 million. We currently have approximately 6,000 employees back to work, as our members are operating at approximately 60% capacity due to the current restrictions. At our full capacity, it is estimated that collectively, the gaming industry provides 37,000 jobs directly and indirectly in communities throughout the province. In fiscal 2019-2020, casinos and community gaming centers generated $929 million of the $1.3 billion in net income that BCLC delivered to the province of BC to support all the investments in healthcare, education, and community programs. Gaming revenues are also a long-term source of revenue for the BC First Nations. The provincial government provides First Nations with 7% of the BCLC's net income for the next 23 years. The agreement will share approximately $100 million per year from provincial net gaming revenue as expected to result in approximately $3 billion in revenues shared with First Nations by 2045 to support priorities for communities such as enhanced social services, education, infrastructure, cultural revitalization, and self-governance capacity. The provincial government also shares gaming revenue with host local governments. Local governments that host local gaming facilities in their area receive a 10% share of the net gaming income. In 2019-2020, $93.5 million was dispersed amongst 32 host local governments to fund programs and projects determined by these municipalities. In addition, $140 million was given to not-for-profit organizations through community gaming grants throughout BC to support their delivery of ongoing programs and services that meet the needs of their specific communities. The members of the BCGIA are proud to support and be an active and integral part of the local communities where they live and work. We are also proud to provide socially responsible gaming entertainment and non-gaming amenities that provide great jobs and contribute to the BC economy. The gaming industry has been operating successfully here in BC for over 30 years, and we look forward to the next 30 years of creating more jobs and economic growth. Thank you so much for your time today, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Shira. Ben.
Shira.
Hi.
The glasses look great. So just to put it in perspective, I don't know how much out of the BC gaming revenue that gets out into community gaming grants that, you know, are all sorts, sports, recreation, etc. It's like, I just, a quick glance, it's over $300 million that's gone times the 1.6 or 1.5 years that you've been closed. So I don't know what that 60% will look like. What's your projections based, you've only kind of got 2 months under your belt of this 60% capacity.
Yeah.
What do you think the revenues are going to be for sharing with First Nations, the communities, and community gaming grants?
It's a great question, and I would be lying if I didn't say that every mayor that hosts a casino in their riding hasn't asked all of us that question. Oh. It's still a bit too soon to tell, but what I can tell you is almost every property throughout British Columbia had lineups when we opened for weeks on end. And we are sticking very clearly to the 60% capacity. And in some establishments, it's 57%, some it's 63%. It depends on the floor layout and the machines in each casino, so it's not quite 60% at every single establishment. What I also can tell you is that people who are in there are happy to be there. Our protocols and our health and safety guidelines are so strict. Obviously, we are now following the vaccine passport and very pleased to do so. With that, the masks, the 2-meter social distancing, the plexiglass, the customers and patrons that do come into our facilities feel very safe and they're happy to be there. So right now, the numbers that are coming in, and BCLC should be able to get those numbers at the end of the first quarter we have been open, will show that we're doing pretty well. We might not be at full capacity levels, but I think that the host local governments and the province will be very happy with the numbers that are coming in from each facility since we've been open.
Yeah, thanks very much. I did tour one of the facilities in Kelowna, and I have to commend you. Everything you said in that statement about the precautions, the security, I had no idea. And anyways, thank you.
Mike.
Chair, and thank you, Shira. I'm just curious whether your organization has any spillover, so to speak, with like Hastings Park and Fraser Downs?
I can't speak to that. I actually work for Gateway Casinos, but I'm here as the chair of the BC Gaming Industry Association, and those two facilities are not part of the association.
Okay, thank you.
Group, you had a question?
I do have a question. Thank you, Chair, for your presentation. I really appreciate the gaming grant program. That's really helpful to many organizations out there. But in today's time, when access and inclusion is quite important for everybody, so I just want to ask you, do you have a kind of lens to make sure the gaming grant is accessible to people, and you're including everybody, whether it's people, BIPOC people or First Nation and so on?
That's a great question, and I honestly don't have the answers. I don't run the gaming grant program. However, as a follow-up to this meeting, I can get some information on that as to how it works and forward to the committee, if that would be okay.
That will be great, particularly if you can provide us the information. And also, I know if there's any outreach program to educate those people that this funding is available to particularly small organizations to help other people.
That's a great point, and I will definitely follow up with this committee. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other indicators of wanting to ask you a question, Shira. So, Shira, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for taking the time to come and present to us. Of course, your casino plays a really big role in my community. It's a vibrant center to the community. And thank you for reminding us where those gaming grants come from. They play a critical role in helping frontline community services do what they need to do. And they come from your industry. So
thank you very much. It was great to see everybody. Appreciate it.
And our next presenter is Blair Quayle, New Car Dealers of BC.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and committee members. It's really great to see you all in person. It's a nice experience and a privilege to be here. As the chair mentioned, I'm the president of the New Car Dealers Association of BC. We represent just over 400 new car dealers who do business in just over 55 communities around the province of British Columbia that generate some $16 billion in economic activity. They provide directly and indirectly about just over 30,000 family supporting jobs in the province. One of the communities and many communities that our members serve are, of course, First Nations communities around the province. And on this special National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, our members are taking the opportunity to think about what it means to talk to their employees about what the day is about. And I think you'll probably find a number of orange shirts located around the province in BC's new car dealers. So we're privileged to be here today. Aside from representing BC's new car dealers, the association is privileged to administer the Clean Energy Vehicle Program, now called Go Electric BC, for Clean BC. The rebate point of sale program for if you purchase an electric vehicle, you can get up to $3,000 off a qualifying vehicle, and we're privileged to work on that and administer it. We've been doing that now for about 10 years. We just celebrated 10 years and 50,000 rebates given out under the program. And I just noticed the other day the DeRoche folks that are sort of a national collector of data on all things automotive indicated that we'd achieved 12% of new vehicle sales are now electric vehicles, which is a record for this country and for North America, and something all British Columbians, I think, should be very proud of. I'd mentioned sort of some of the economic input and the economic engine that our dealers are. We're very grateful to government and members of the legislature for all the tremendous work done through the pandemic and continuing to be done, allowing our members to stay open and serve their customers. Transportation is such a critical part of keeping our society moving, even in pandemics. And So our members have been open, and I know the finance minister is pleased to see the input of PST coming from our members through this time. Just interesting to note, 1 in 7 jobs in this country is tied to the automotive sector. Pre-COVID, sold about 200,000 new vehicles in this province. When COVID hit, we fell off a bit of a cliff in March of 2020, dropping some 70% in vehicle sales. Fortunately, that came back over the last number of months. And we're not quite back to 2019 levels, but we're getting very close. The big challenge going forward right now, of course, aside from the pandemic, is the shortage of computer chips and other parts. The global supply chain is in disarray and has a lot of challenges to work through, which is meaning the supply and inventory of new vehicles is very short in the province and for the dealers, which in turn has turned people into looking at used vehicles, which now are also short in the province. So it's going to be a challenging time going forward, but our members continue to look forward to finding new and creative ways to deal with that. I have sort of 3 areas I just wanted to bring to your attention today before we wrap up. One, going forward, a challenge that we frequently bring to this committee is the issues around luxury tax in the province. I've a bit of a broken record on this, but I will bring it up again to say that we hope government will really take a serious look and review how the PST is structured, particularly coming out of the pandemic. It's a good opportunity to see if all of the structures of tax are working well. From our perspective, a tax that leads to pickup trucks, work trucks being taxed as a luxury vehicle makes no sense, particularly in the province where we're trying to grow and come out of a pandemic. Secondly, I commend and encourage government to continue its support for rebates for electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. It's very important, and I also continue to ask government to look to ways to support and provide training for technical skilled trades. This trade certification recently was great news, but we're continuing to look for and have a shortage of skilled tradespeople to repair and fix vehicles, but also all sorts of entry-level jobs right through sales, marketing, you name it, at dealerships. So those are sort of the 3 areas I'd ask government to continue to look at in the budget for coming forward, and I know I'm pretty much out of time, so I'll wrap up there and take questions. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Blair. Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Blair, for your presentation. I want to see if you can just, there was a lot of joy in this room when you said 12% of the sales are EVs. And you make mention that we're like the leaders in North America. So can you explain that growth in the curve to get us to 12% and what the rationale that you believe that we're at 12% and shooting higher is?
Well, we've been privileged, as I mentioned, to administer this program with our members across the province and with government for 10 years. And it started out very slow, as you might expect. There wasn't a lot of electric vehicles available at the time. But government has, I think, rightly recognized the power of working with the network of the people that actually sell the vehicles as a way to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles. Now, the incentives are incredibly important, and 10 years ago when staff in government called and asked me, sort of, what are the things that you think we need to do? I just said 3 simple things. You need the incentive to bridge the, until we have parity between gas and electric vehicles price-wise, you need something to bridge that, and the incentives, the rebates are there for that purpose. You also need to make sure there's charging infrastructure where people live, work, and play, so that they know that if they buy an electric vehicle, there's somewhere they can charge it. Fortunately, battery technology's improved dramatically in the last 10 years, and the range on these vehicles is much better. Range anxiety is not so much a thing anymore. And thirdly, it's education. It's taking the time in all sorts of ways to help people explore and experience an electric vehicle. And I've found, we've been running green ride and drives at the auto show that we put on every year, well, almost every year when we're not in a pandemic. that if you put a bum in the seat, as it were, whether people ride in it or get a chance to drive an electric vehicle, it really changes the conversation and their experience and how they look at it. So we've worked with government and continue to do so on opportunities and some other partners, Fraser Basin Council and others, Emotive, to make sure that those opportunities exist for people to try those. So government has stuck to that plan for 10 years. It's been very successful. The dealers of this province have embraced electric vehicles and have been a big part of helping to promote them and make sure their customers understand them and give them a chance to drive them and try them. And that simple combination, I think, has led us to this 12%. But it's been a slow, steady climb. Now, as we have a lot more EVs available for consumers, assuming we get past some of these electronic chip challenges, I think we'll see that continue to grow.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Blair. Good to see you again in person, as you said.
Yes, thank you.
Can you just, being that you had a couple of years of experience with the luxury tax and the PST, graduated rates from $55,000 up.
Right.
What did that do to car sales? And I guess really to help us better understand, did it make people buy more fuel-efficient cars? Did they buy down? And where is that working today, considering the shortage of cars? Is everything getting a luxury tax on it? What's happening?
Well, I think I saw recently that the average price of a vehicle in this country, a new vehicle, is about $46,000 now. So having a luxury tax kick in at $55,000, part of the challenge here is the threshold hasn't been adjusted for many, many years. And as everybody knows, things are more expensive. And vehicles are much more, use many more materials that are much more expensive. You know, the materials, the paints, the safety features, all of these things make vehicles just naturally more expensive, yet the threshold hasn't come up. And we've found that, you know, hit pickup trucks, for example, particularly hard. And to your question about what it's kind of, you know, how it's changing behavior, there is a, you know, for a 1-ton pickup truck, an exemption. So if you want a smaller pickup truck, you pay luxury tax on it. So what unfortunately happens is, or for some, you know, you're forced into a larger truck than you need, which means heavier trucks on the road, more emissions, and on and on. A number of unintended consequences from those kinds of things. The luxury super taxes, as I call them, that were introduced in 2019, for example, have also modified the behavior of some folks who can purchase those vehicles, and they have, you know, various ways. Many of them have addresses in other jurisdictions, like Alberta. So they use that address in Alberta to purchase the vehicle, have it delivered there, and then don't pay the tax, and can ship it back and forth to Vancouver to drive it, or wherever else in the province as they'd like, as many times as they want, given the savings that they have on luxury tax. So there are ways around it which have forced a reduction, actually, in the amount of PST that's coming into government after that tax was introduced. About 33% in that first year reduction in the input of taxes from that high-end level of vehicles.
Well, Blair, there's a lot of interest in what you have to say, but we're out of time.
Yes.
So sorry about that.
No,
sorry to
fine.
the committee members who had additional questions. But thank you so much for coming today to talk to us about what is a very important topic in terms of how we work together to address climate change. I, for one, have been a victim of the computer chip problem. We have something on order. Can't wait. But thank you.
It will come, but be patient.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much for the
Thank
time.
you.
Appreciate the invitation.
And we have one more presenter before we take a bit of a break, and that's Heather O'Hara, BC Association of Farmers Markets.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see some new faces on the committee. I've been here a few times in the past as well, so So thank you very much for the invitation to participate today on behalf of the BC Association of Farmers Markets. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge the significance we all share of this National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and the privilege we share meeting on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Similarly, on behalf of our organization, BC Farmers Markets, which represents 145 plus member farmers markets, at which more than 4,000 farm, food, and artisan vendors of all kinds sell at farmers markets across this province, I'd like to acknowledge and express gratitude for the unceded Indigenous lands and territories on which these farmers markets are situated and thrive, and on whose lands the food all of us eat is grown and harvested. Today, our organization reflects on the systemic racism, tragedy, and genocide inflicted on Indigenous peoples and communities through Indian residential school policy and actions. We grieve in solidarity with our friends and cousins, the Tk'emlúps te Secwépemc Nation, for their 250 lost children and the thousands of other ignored children across the country. In 2021, BC Association of Farmers Markets also celebrates the Indigenous-led Quesaltecan Farmers and Artisan Market, one of our newest BCFM member farmers markets from the same Tk'emlúps community who has suffered so greatly. Alongside the tragic loss of the Two Rivers Farmers Markets in Lytton due to fire, one of our long-standing and inspirational Indigenous engaged member farmers markets. BC Association of Farmers Markets is currently on our own journey of equity, justice, and decolonization, and is committed to doing the hard work, walking a path towards Indigenous reconciliation. As such, we support a provincial budget and financial investment which supports the self-determination and participation of Indigenous people and communities in all sectors and areas of the province, in addition to the food and agricultural sector in which we operate. We invite the province of BC to consider the following 2022-23 budget considerations outlined below. One, the idea of sustainable investment in farmers markets, along with the growing consumer demand, COVID, and climate change, we are catalysts to localize our food system and ensure greater food security in BC. We really need strong, sufficiently resourced, and meaningful investment in these nonprofit farmers markets we represent, along with the farms and food producers, to meet growing consumer demand for food grown and processed locally through direct BC producer-to-plate sales channels. Two, local economies and the BC Farmers Markets Hatch and Hype program we just launched in the Kootenays this summer. So in 2021, thanks to a grant from Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resources, Operations and Rural Development, BCFM is currently piloting Hatch and Hype, a farmers market business incubator initiative in the Kootenays and Columbia Basin region to support the launch of new BC farm and food products and businesses while assisting with COVID economic recovery. It's going great. We've long recognized the role of farmers markets as small business incubators, and so too have many others. And we'd like the province to make additional investment in this program to expand and scale this work all over the regions, to all other regions across the province as part of its provincial COVID economic recovery strategy and support for small business. Number three, climate change and sustainability. We and our members recognize the climate change emergency, and we believe that the BC must invest in and establish farmers and food producers, including small-scale farmers, as true climate partners and seek farmer-led solutions to incentivize low-carbon, climate-friendly farming and food production practices. BC farmers are uniquely positioned to play a pivotal role in climate adaptation and mitigation. Four, equity, justice, and decolonization, which I entered the conversation today with. We encourage the province of BC to invest in programs, services, and supports of all kinds and in all sectors to increase equity, access, opportunity, and participation by all British Columbians, including in our sector. And finally, the BC Farmers Market Nutrition Coupon Program, beloved by many, supported greatly by all levels of government, and just a wonderful program. We're very proud to deliver that in partnership with the Ministry of Health. We're requesting ongoing funding to ensure the continuation of this program in 2022, and we'd love to see an increased investment in this program in the total amount of $2.7 million annually, which will enable us to expand the impact of this program in 2022 as follows. Increase our weekly coupon value by $3 from 21 to 24, adding 6 more communities and an additional 300 spots to address waiting lists. In closing, thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Heather. I'll now invite members of the committee to ask you some questions. Harwinder.
Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate your presentation, and it's pretty thorough. We are pretty blessed to have a very lively farmers market in Vernon and Lumbee, and it is alive to our community where people also get to socialize as well. And coming from farmer family, it's always my favorite place to go. You mentioned that adding 6 more communities to existing. Do you know which communities? Perhaps maybe it's in somewhere in your presentation. I was quickly.
You know what? I did not include them. What it would be related to is when we get a new farmers market member in a new place, we give them some time to get settled in to being a farmers, like establish their farmers market. And so I believe we have a couple of new farmers markets that came online this year, for example, but who may not be participating in that program. I can't remember offhand, but for sure we know who they are. It's not top of mind right now who they would be. And then next year we may have some new members that come on board as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Vernon is definitely in the program though.
Thank you. And I think I found it's a great way to connect our future generation, like kids. They get very curious about farming. As you know, the newer generations have been shifting away from that concept. The farmers market do bring kids their interest back to where our food comes from and food supply chain. So I really appreciate the work of you and your members too.
Thank you. You know, a lot of sometimes participants also become vendors, right? There's a whole cycle that happens, like this wonderful, all these offshoot kind of benefits of this program are incredible, right?
Absolutely.
And it was very well used last year and this year as well, in spite of COVID, right? And especially because of COVID as well.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Heather? Ben.
Thanks very much, Heather. Having been connected with the farmers markets as the former minister, I have to say that I'm so appreciative of how they've grown and the interest in them. What can we do to, I guess, expand their reach throughout the year? Like I'm talking about the farming producers. We've got the incentive to get the consumer to come there, but what do we have to do to get more farmers kind of engaged in it?
Sure. So a couple of things. I think, you know, operating the farmers markets, 99% of them are nonprofits. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, understaffed or underpaid. So there's not a lot of operating capacity for farmers markets, except for the vendor booth fees, which really is sort of bare bones to get those things going. So I believe an investment in the people and the places where farmers markets are, and the operational stuff is really important, because then you have some dedicated capacity to advance and manage those really, you know, like up and down, take it down, put it up. All that effort that goes into that, some dedicated storage, some dedicated equipment and infrastructure, in addition to the people. So that's one thing, to be able to operationalize that all year. Number 2 would be really, like, we do a lot of marketing, but having some of that operating capacity will let them be much more abundant in terms of their offerings, and I believe that would attract more farmers to participate, so that there's more consumers going, and to make it the cost benefit as well. You know, a lot of farmers also want that direct sales channel now. I think so I think there's a real appeal for farmers to have this as one of a couple of channels for themselves. They're doing a lot of farm gate sales, online sales, and having this farmers markets to do those direct sales is something that a lot of, especially small scale farmers, really, really want. So the stronger the farmers market capacity, the more appealing it is for them to be able to run and the farmers to participate as well.
There's always more that can be done.
Yeah. I mean, they're such heroes, right? The people that pull off these markets every week, it's such an undertaking. So, and the people that go, frankly, it's a lot of work for the vendors as well.
Well, I see no other questions, Heather. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for coming to meet with us today and for sharing your enthusiasm. your dedication comes across so well. But I also want to thank you for taking so much of the time allotted to you to talk about what this day means in terms of truth and reconciliation, and about the first people who were on this land. Because, of course, farmers markets are all about land. So that was a wonderful connection that you made.
Thank you very much. And it was lovely to be able to speak about Quesaltican, that new farmers market in Kamloops, and the Lytton. I get emotional about Lytton because it was such a beautiful story and model for a farmers market in Indigenous engagement. So thank you for indulging me. It was a little bit longer, maybe than you would like to hear, but it was really important to contextualize the issue.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Okay. Bye for now.
So we'll now take a break until 10:15. The meeting back to order. And our next presenter is Christine Terpsma, BC Dairy Association. So Christine, you have 5 minutes. We will signal you when you have 30 seconds left so you can shift into conclusion mode, and then we'll have 5 minutes to ask you questions.
Perfect.
So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Today, we join together to acknowledge the tragic history and ongoing legacy of residential schools. May we commit to work towards a greater understanding of our shared history, to learn from it, and to help create a better and more inclusive future. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Christine Terpsma, and I'm the Director of Producer and Public Affairs at the BC Dairy Association. BC Dairy represents about 500 dairy farmers throughout British Columbia. Nearly all of our dairy farms are family-owned and operated. Our industry contributes over $1.2 billion to the provincial GDP and 12,700 full-time jobs in multiple regions throughout the province, making milk the largest land-based agricultural commodity in BC. I am pleased to be here to present to this committee on behalf of BC's dairy farmers. Local farms are uniquely positioned to help our government build a stronger BC through increasing provincial food security. We have 3 related recommendations, which I am happy to outline today. Our first recommendation is to work with government to develop school feeding programs to nourish children, starting with BC's most vulnerable children. BC Dairy has supported nutrition education and healthy eating programs in schools for over 40 years. We want to be part of growing these programs to support the province's goal of healthy eating for vulnerable children within all BC school districts. An example is a series of pilot projects that are currently taking place within New Westminster and Abbotsford school districts. BC Dairy and Simply Foods have entered into a pilot partnership with both of these districts, which centers around increasing healthy food access for students. This spring, BC Dairy provided dairy products to over 150 subsidized students weekly in 12 schools in New West and 220 vulnerable students weekly in 17 schools in Abbotsford. We ask the government to maintain these pilot projects as a model for BC and seek support in expanding to all school districts to ensure children receive the nutrition that they need to learn. Our second recommendation is for the BC government to enhance provincial food security by increasing dairy processing capacity within Western Canada. We've seen throughout the pandemic that British Columbians increasingly value stable supply chains and increased self-sufficiency within our food system. BC farmers are in a position to advance food production right here in our backyard, contributing more jobs to both our rural and urban economies. In partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, BC Dairy recently initiated a study to understand the opportunities and barriers to investment in dairy processing innovation and growth within British Columbia. We look forward to sharing the findings with our government partners following the completion of this study in November of this year. We are confident that with increased investment in dairy processing, we can make BC a true leader in food security and provide more jobs for British Columbians. Our third and final recommendation for today is for the BC government to ensure all farms, including dairy farms, can continue to lead in environmental sustainability through Clean BC. BC Dairy believes it's important that BC is taking a leadership role in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Dairy farms are in a position to lead in innovation as our food system adapts to a changing climate, from clean energy production, carbon capture and forage crops, to nutrient management technologies that have the capacity to reduce emissions. Dairy farms are a part of strengthening our province's resilience in the face of climate change. The BC Agriculture Council and Investment Agriculture Foundation are currently developing a sector-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy that's called Ag Clean. We ask that future provincial budgets support this work in order to advance agricultural adaptation and climate change mitigation. In closing, in order to expand local food production and enhance food security for communities around the province, we believe that Budget 2022 should be a historic budget that firmly places agriculture sectors, including dairy farms, as partners. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Christine. And our first question is from Megan.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to see you again. You too. Appreciate you coming to make this submission today. I have two very brief questions. The first one is, are you part of a Feed BC program through the Ministry of Agriculture? And the second one is, what processing support gaps exist right now that you feel are top priorities that need to be addressed?
Thank you for those questions. We are exploring partnerships with Feed BC, and individual farms that have a processing arm of their business have some direct partnerships as well. So we look forward to growing those over time, especially with some of the items we've outlined in our submission. And the second question related to processing gaps, one of the largest ones really is capacity. So dairy farms have the ability to grow the amount of raw milk produced on their farms with their existing facilities and some investments. However, they need the quota growth in order to make those investments and produce more milk. So without more local processing based here in BC and Western Canada, dairy farmers do not have a vehicle to ship raw milk and have that processed to increase the amount of local milk produced in communities throughout the province. So that's the largest one. The processing project that we've initiated with the ministry to explore other gaps and opportunities, I'm sure will identify others that may be of interest, and we'll make sure the committee receives a copy of that report.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, but just wanted to lend my support, obviously, for the dairy sector. It's a huge contributor to local economy in the Shuswap region. And as you've highlighted, the large majority are family-owned and operated farms. And so when they go to construct new barns, new equipment, they certainly do utilize a lot of local resources in our communities. So it has a huge impact in the riding of Shuswap. And I just want to thank you very much for keeping your industry front and center for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And certainly the Okanagan is one of the major dairy sectors throughout BC, and we're pleased to have many members growing their businesses there.
Shagrup.
Thank you, Christine, for your presentation. I'm interested to know more about one of the recommendations you're making, particularly the school feeding program. And we also heard yesterday somebody else talking about the universal school food program. So, and you are indicating that there are some pilot programs going on right now. And if you can provide me a bit more information, and also, if possible, if you know that if we have to expand that program to in the school system in the post-secondary grade 11, grade 12, is there any cost analysis you have done which you can provide to us?
Yes, thank you for that question. The pilot projects that I spoke about in New Westminster and Abbotsford are a partnership between BC Dairy and Simply Foods, which is a catering company that's based out of Burnaby. And they have a program called Fuel Up that is located within several school districts throughout the province, whereby they provide nutritious lunches directly in partnership with schools within those districts. So we wanted to take a look at how to make those lunches more nutritionally sound with the inclusion of nutritious dairy products. So our registered dietitians at BC Dairy worked directly with Simply Foods to support their menu and to be able to provide subsidized meals to students in vulnerable school districts, just in those two to start, but there is an opportunity to increase to other school districts, and we'd love to work with the provincial government and some of the other nonprofit partners in this space to be able to make that happen.
Who is funding these pilot projects now?
BC Dairy has contributed to the dairy portion of the school lunches, and I would need to ask Simply Foods in terms of other funding support, whether that's coming directly from the district or if there's other nonprofits in that space.
Thank you very much.
Ben.
Thanks very much, Christine. You talked about increased production and the need for quota growth. And this, I know a little bit about this only because we were working on exports into Asia. And we had a talk about this, Megan and I, last night, just about the brand of Canada and the fact that the organic milk that, there's a huge differential in terms of the brand. So I don't know whether that's just fallen off the radar. The Canadian Dairy Association and myself were doing extensive work in Asia. But the only thing I wonder about is that the quota imbalance between across the country, it seems to me that we could do more in terms of value-added production like cheeses and things like that. I know we have production here, but I do look at the diversity from Quebec and even places like Manitoba, and I guess I'm just kind of wondering, is there anything that we could do more to help get more of that to come to British Columbia and increase opportunities for dairy producers here?
Absolutely, and I believe dairy farmers feel the same way. They would like to see increased innovation within the products that are being offered locally, produced by BC dairy farmers. And there's several examples from Eastern Canada. Joya, an ultra-filtered milk that has an extra amount of protein. We're starting to see that come to our shelves. It's coming from Ontario. There's an opportunity for BC farmers to produce similar products if we had the processing capacity within the province to be able to offer them. So I believe there is a willingness from the farming community to be able to partner with processors to be able to offer some of those more niche products or more innovative products that we're seeing coming from Eastern Canada to our store shelves.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Christine, unfortunately, we are out of time. There's so much more to talk about when it comes to dairy and the role of milk in our communities and our lives. As you were speaking, you were reminding me that when I was in elementary school, every child got a little carton of milk to drink at our desk. It was just normal. It was what was done, and I'm very encouraged about your ideas about expanding production and expanding the presence of milk in the schools. So thank you for coming and sharing this with us.
Thank you again for having me.
And our next presenter is Laura Gillanders, Farm Watch. So, Laura, you have 5 minutes. We'll signal you when you only have 30 seconds left so you can think about wrapping it up, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Laura Gillanders. I'm the spokesperson and coordinator for Richmond Farm Watch, which is an organization of farmers and residents who protect farmland in Richmond and throughout the province. We have a set of recommendations for you. You should have them on your iPad. That we believe some ways that the province can use the budget to enhance farming viability in the province. I'm just going to skip right forward to the recommendations on the bottom of page 2. So farm classification and status. Revise the income requirements for farm status. So we recommend to decrease the minimum farm revenue threshold on properties less than 2 acres. It's currently at $10,000. We believe if you lowered that to the $2,500, that it would encourage small lot farming instead of those landowners feeling that their parcels are not suitable for farming. And then also look at increasing the minimum farm revenue threshold on properties greater than 2 acres, which is currently at $2,500, which would avoid rewarding token farming on large private estates. Make the BC assessment farm classification contingent on a minimum 5-year lease. Secure land tenure is increasingly difficult for tenant farmers who lease farmland from speculators who may have little to no interest in having their land farmed in the long term. Often speculators offer only a 1-year lease to protect their ability to develop or sell at any time. This is a massive and far-reaching barrier to farmers in running their business, investing in equipment or infrastructure, growing crops, and practicing proper land management. It's almost impossible to run a farm or business when the lease is so insecure, since farming does not operate on a yearly cycle. It involves long-term planning, field preparation, a season or more in advance. Research what has happened on farmland since the ALR was established. We could provide funding for a government study on what has happened to farmland over time, including the state of the farming sector when the ALR was established, trends since then, for example, how much land was lost to various exclusions such as churches, private schools, golf courses, industrial complexes, residential shopping malls, subdivisions, mega mansions, gravel pits, and other non-farming activities. A component of this study could be to determine whether house size restrictions have had an impact on the overall performance of the farming sector, though it may be too soon to tell for that. Taxation. While FarmWatch understands the federal government continues to provide emergency funds to maintain food security access across Canada, this doesn't go far enough. Smaller scale local farmers have been left to fend for themselves. So allowing the PST exemption on smaller quantities of some materials, for example, the small scale agriculture is a significant and growing part of the food system and an important part of solutions adaptation to climate change. So we recommend removing the 100-foot by 20-foot minimum for greenhouse poly as specified in the Bulletin PST 101, because the current minimum discriminates against small-scale farmers on leased land who lack the ability to install larger greenhouses because of many reasons: landowner restrictions, layout of the land, the intensive nature of small-scale practices where smaller areas are more intensively planted. Buying farmland for leasing, we believe there's an opportunity for the government to purchase farmland for leasing back to new farmers, and even leasing to own programs for new farmers. And then incentives, subsidies, grants to farmers who are growing food, providing incentives, subsidies, and grants to farmers who are growing fruits and vegetables and providing local food security, food that's grown locally and sold locally. Farmers who are using regenerative farm methods, which help increase crop yields and fight climate change, including no-till agriculture, cover crops, crop rotation. Farmers who are facing problems with getting their produce to market because of the cost of required liability insurance for farm stands and farmers markets, because of the cost of marketing and setting up online ordering systems and developing sales stream methods. Farmers who are growing fruits and vegetables seeking to become GAP certified, which can be very costly. The Canada GAP is a food safety program for farmers that produce, handle, and broker fruits and vegetables. Farmers who are requiring extension services, technical and marketing support, and farmers who are hiring local workers. We could subsidize wages similar to those for Red Seal Trades apprenticeships so that farmers can hire and train workers who are paid a livable wage. Those are our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And our first question is from Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. I have two quick questions. The first one being, have you looked at the other possible effects of sort of the 5-year lease minimum in order for a property to be eligible for farm status? I assume the premise would be that landlords that wanted the farm status and see it as long-term investment would be likely to lease that property even if it was 5 years, because that's their goal. Where there are other issues like GST in the sale, so if it's a short flip, do you think that there's any chance that it would actually disincentivize people to lease their properties and actually create less availability of farmland? And my second question is, I read your recommendations that were put in writing, and one of them under 1C was to research sort of the longitudinal situation with the ALR. And I'm wondering if you've checked to see if that might have already been done. Just curious. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I have heard that concern that possibly it could deter a landowner from wanting to lease at all. I think the tax implications of having an estate that's worth $18 million versus one that could be assessed at $80,000 per se could be enough of an incentive to really want to have farm status, but currently the landowners take advantage of that. They can do a year-by-year lease. We know that especially in Richmond, close to residential areas, the landowners along some streets believe that eventually their entire street will be turned into townhouses. So they like to keep the investment liquid, even though there's no indication that they would ever get an exclusion from the ALR. That's what a lot of the landowners are hoping for. So we hope that the incentive of the farm tax being low and incentivizing landowners to give long-term leases, that they'll see the benefit of that over keeping the short-term leases. The second question, I actually am not sure if that has already been done. I think that surveys that individual, like the Farmers Institutes, will do an inventory of, like I know that Richmond did a full inventory back in 2011, I believe, to see what's happened in Richmond, trends in Richmond. But I'm not sure that it was, not a province-wide.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Group.
Thanks, Laura, for coming today.
Thank you.
Your recommendation 1, which says to revise the income requirement for farm status, it said decrease the minimum farm revenue threshold on property less than 0.8 hectares, which is 1.9 acres, currently $10,000. And then it goes to continue saying increase the minimum farm revenue threshold on property greater than 0.8 hectare. That's currently 2,500. That doesn't make sense to me like this. If it's less than 0.8, it's 10,000. If it's more than 0.8, it is $2,500. Can you explain that to me?
Yes, correct. So back when this was established, there was many small parcels in the ALR, and they wanted to prevent people from buying these small properties and turning them into just large estates. So they increased the revenue threshold to $10,000 for the small properties as a way to avoid fake farming, so to speak. But as the years have gone on, we believe that that's become counterproductive, because it's actually so difficult to make $10,000 on a half acre or 0.75 of an acre, for example, that we see landowners pushing back on those properties being in the ALR at all. They say it's impossible to get farm status, so it's really just a large estate. So we believe that if we lower it to $2,500, then you'd see a lot of small-scale farms on the backs of these smaller acreages, because people would feel like they actually have the ability to get farm status. But the larger properties, to grow $2,500, we're seeing just such massive estates with fully landscaped acreages and racetracks and gambling houses, and just ridiculous. And then they'll have a few rows of blueberries, and just enough to get the $2,500, and so they don't have to pay full taxes on these large estates. So we think that there's room to increase that on the larger acreages, but look at decreasing it to incentivize.
In Richmond, there was a significant activity to take over the ALR by some of the developers.
Yes.
So if you reduce the amount from $10,000 to whatever it's called, the minimum farm revenue, are you not opening doors again to the developers to come back?
I don't think so, because we have district house size limits now. So the developers, it was primarily driven by the ability to build a large mansion. So purchasing a small acreage, putting a 15,000 square foot house on it, and flipping it immediately to a foreign investor. So the house size limit is preventing that. We're already seeing small farms being bought and the house retained, and small little farm operations starting up. So we're already seeing the benefits of that. And so if these smaller acreages could be used for farming, instead of just a big house and a yard, then that's a good thing. They can't develop it, they could farm it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Laura, I know that there's more questions, but we are out of time for now. I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for raising these issues, for making these recommendations, and for the work that you do, and in short, all the work that you do to make sure that we still have farms to watch. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.
And our next presenter is Daniel Allard, BC Stone, Sand and Gravel Association. So Daniel, you have 5 minutes. We will signal you when you have 30 seconds left, so you notice to wrap it up, and then we'll ask you questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, today especially, I want to acknowledge the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish First Nations on whose land we are today, the Coquitlam First Nation whose land we operate on in Coquitlam, the Matsqui and Kwantlen First Nation who my family's business has operated on in the past, as well as the Nanoose First Nation on Vancouver Island. Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Dan Allard. I've been in the sand and gravel business my entire life. I'm third generation. I'm also a director of the Stone Sand and Gravel Association and head of the Sustainability Committee. I'm here today to follow up on our recommendation. We have three very straightforward recommendations in our submission that you, I'm sure, all have. Inspectors, education, and infrastructure are our three priorities. We've noticed over the last several years the permitting process for new mines, especially new aggregate mines, taking a lot longer than it has in the past. And as an indirect result of this, there has been not necessarily illegal mining, but legal adjacent mining, non-competitors to us bypassing the permitting process. And we believe that 20 new inspectors would be a very good use of funding to basically get us back on track as an industry. There are, last time I counted, almost 1,500, almost 1,500 mines in the area that are, properly permitted. And when, there are people who can't get a mine permit, there's demand. The growth the continued growth in the building industry and in infrastructure projects, demand for sand and gravel has not gone down, and we've been working gangbusters my entire life to supply that demand. So those inspectors, I think, are a key part of our recommendation. Second is education. We've recently gone out and put together an education package for elementary school kids, and the number of kids the number of young people in general that we've hired over the years has sort of waxed and waned, but we certainly see a lot of older employees that are planning on retiring soon. We have 10,000 jobs easily in the industry that need filling, and the number of students that have gone through, for example, BCIT to earn Red Seal trades has not necessarily kept pace. So we would really like to see an investment in education towards trades that will help us fill not only the general demand for jobs that we know that everyone's struggling right now to fill positions, but we've sort of noticed this over the last 20 years and more. So we would really appreciate an investment in education that can bring people into our industry, and we've made a concerted effort to try and help that as an association as well at the ground level. And the final recommendation is infrastructure. There are thousands of kilometers of roads in British Columbia, and every road, every building, every piece of infrastructure that is built uses sand and gravel in some way, whether it's asphalt or concrete. And those pieces of infrastructure will create jobs for British Columbians, and those are our three recommendations. I don't think I met my 30 seconds, thank you. So yeah, I will leave it at that, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today, if there are any questions.
And there are, Dan.
Oh, perfect.
Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation today. I was just curious with recommendation number 1. You talk about investing in an additional 20 mine inspectors, and I was just curious, Why the number 20? How was that calculated? Was it based on sort of when you had an ideal time of turnaround and that would be what it would take? Is there that much growth? So I was just curious where that recommendation came from.
That was a fairly informal conversation. I guess it would have been a week or two ago. Jimenez Henning spoke to the BC Stone Sand and Gravel Association about the restructuring of his mine inspections department. And that sort of felt like an appropriate number that they could, it was sort of the highest number that they could bring on. There was not a lot of thought that went into that on my part, but yeah, that seemed like a reasonable number. But that's definitely a conversation that we have been having with Jimenez Henning, who's the chief inspector of mines, and they've, like I said, recently undergone a reorganization into two separate inspection departments that I think 20 would fit well in there. But that's definitely a good question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Ben.
Thanks very much, Dan. And I know working on permitting of mines is not an easy thing. Just I'm thinking about the public in terms of what their lack of understanding. So I commend you on the fact that you're doing something in schools. But I want to go back to skills training. What are the skills that the Sand and Gravel Association, what is the skill sets that are needed, like in the sense, what areas of training do you need?
Personally and immediately, heavy-duty mechanics. Red Seal heavy-duty mechanics are something that we, as a company, struggle with finding. We have 4 right now out of probably a dozen mechanics that work for us who are in the process of moving from their apprenticeship to a Red Seal ticket. And we're very proud of that fact that we've managed to keep some young people on in our operation through their apprenticeship project. Drivers is another thing. That's not necessarily an education funding issue, though. But generally, anyone who goes through any sort of trade school, and I think focusing more funding on trade school generally will allow people to be more comfortable taking that path in education. So I think focusing on trades in general will benefit us overall, but heavy-duty mechanics and mining engineering are the sort of 2 areas that I would point out specifically that we would target for hiring. But in general, I think that anything that can go towards trade programs will benefit us overall in the long run.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have 2 more questions, and we're closing in on the remaining 2 minutes.
Okay.
So Greg and then Harwinder.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've heard from a number of sand and gravel operators in my riding of Shuswap that permitting, even just renewing existing permits that are up for renewal, huge backlogs having a significant impact. You indicated that you're looking for mine inspectors, but are you hearing from your membership about concerns around the time it takes to even renew existing permits? Not even permitting a new mine, but even just renewing a permit seems to be taken in an inordinate amount of time, putting a lot of pressure on existing operators.
Absolutely, and I'm not sure if there's anything this committee can do to help that. I know that there was a big change in the implementation of Front Counter BC over the last decade, basically. But yeah, that is absolutely a big issue for us as well. So anything you could do on that part as well.
Yeah, I've certainly heard that it seems to be a bit of a black hole. There's seems to be no rhyme or reason. It's not like you're making a renewal and it'll take us 6 or 8 months. It just seems to be, people just never know. It's next month, and a year and a half later, people still haven't had a permit renewed. And so,
absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you kindly for your question.
Harwinder.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dan, for your presentation. A quick question around, you said that there are, due to the licensing issue or permitting backlogs, there are illegal operations are occurring. Do you have the sense how many, if they're actively happening, and if when they're identified, is there a process in place where, associations can complain, and how would these new, obviously new 20 inspectors, I think my question was asked, how the number is justified?
That's a really good question. There are new soil removal and deposition regulations that are in the process of being implemented right now. And one of the ways in which we believe that I would call this legal adjacent mining, is happening is excavation from development sites and just sort of material that is not necessarily being accounted for. We don't really have a number or an idea on that, but those sorts of sites are supplying material into the industry that is not being permitted as a mine. And it doesn't necessarily have to be if it is, if it fits within the soil removal guidelines that are in the process of being implemented. And I think that would be actually outside of the purview of the mine inspectors and permitting, but which that might eventually get on side, I think. But right now we don't really have an idea of where material is coming from, and I think those soil removal regulations will help give us an idea of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the committee, Dan, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to come and make a presentation. As you were speaking and answering questions, I was reflecting that our commitment post-pandemic is to build BC back better. And I think the operative word is build. Mm-hmm. And you've given us some real insight into some of the things that could get in the way of building back better. So thank you so much.
Thank you kindly for your time. I really appreciate it.
And our next presenter is Lisa McGuire, Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC.
Thank you all on the opportunity. I'd first like to recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, honoring the lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families, and communities. As the CEO of the Manufacturing Safety Alliance of BC, we're a not-for-profit health and safety association serving BC manufacturers and food processors. We're one of 14 health and safety associations in our province who collectively provide health and safety support to 30% of employers in British Columbia. We play a key role in helping companies build and maintain effective health and safety programs, supporting companies through the pandemic recovery, addressing mental health in the workplace, and contingency planning for industry occupational health and safety risks stemming from external factors such as climate change. We serve 24% of the manufacturing industry in British Columbia that employ approximately 55,000 to 57,000 British Columbians. So how health and safety associations help, like ourselves, is through this pandemic, have since the very beginning helped support them in building COVID-19 safety plans, together then helping them transition to communicable disease plans, and then working with the medical health officers, getting vaccinations to frontline workers. We continue with that campaign in helping provide those opportunities through our specialist psychiatric advisor on the front lines, giving education around the importance of becoming vaccinated. The industry challenges are significant, with labor shortages, rising costs, and uncertainty causing disruptions to the industry supply chain and related logistics caused by the pandemic, climate change, and other emerging risks. It has a direct impact on the physical and mental well-being at all employee levels, increasing the demand as well for qualified health and safety professionals. Mental health and safety impact is significant. Post-pandemic economic recovery and sustained growth depend on effective workplace mental health programs. Mental health programs are a critical factor in successful recruitment, retention, accommodation, and return-to-work programs in our competitive and shrinking labor market. Manufacturing is in the top 4 industries in which employers are likely to suffer from mental health issues. The manufacturing environment where employees spend a third of their day working in a culture of silence and stigma around mental health, the problem will be exacerbated and recovery period extended. So my first recommendation for your consideration is to invest in sector-based mental health solutions. Workforce shortages also increase the risk of physical injury, increasing workload, stress at all levels, incidence of fatigue, and related risk factors in manufacturing. Companies with health and safety management systems are better prepared to protect workers and mitigate risk in this changing environment. So my second recommendation for your consideration is to invest in strategies to address labor shortages and programs that assist companies to become occupational health and safety system certified. Enhancing professional standards for occupational health and safety roles in manufacturing are important. We've worked through the sector labor market partnership funding to enable the industry to work towards an important goal of standardizing the health and safety professional practice in BC's manufacturing sector. The funding has enabled the Alliance to complete research to identify specific challenges, including the lack of qualified health and safety professionals, developing a clear strategy to define a certification program for the health and safety profession in manufacturing. This has enabled stakeholder consultation and engagement to achieve collaborative solutions. There's more work to do to solve industry's challenges to standardize the occupational health and safety profession in manufacturing. We've shaped a competency and capability model, but there's work in defining an accreditation process and a certification process to help support this challenging goal. So my third recommendation and final recommendation is to continue to invest in the sector labor market project funding initiatives. Together, our provincial goal is to make BC the safest place to live and work in Canada, and the recommendations align to this goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And now I will invite members of the committee to ask some questions. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Lisa, for your presentation. We're hearing it a lot throughout the last little while about labor shortages. And in the cases of some of the other sectors, you know, people have found other employment and moved on. So my question, did you have a labor shortage prior to the pandemic and you continue to have that, or did your employees or those people in the sector just find work elsewhere?
There definitely was a pre-pandemic challenge, but it has been exacerbated through the pandemic. I've engaged in external outreach with various employers over the past few weeks, and it is really a challenge for industry right now.
Any other questions? Well, Lisa, I guess your presentation was very clear to the point. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you for presenting to us. Thank you for putting your recommendations together, all of which are about making sure that employees are safe in their workplaces and healthy in their workplaces. So thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And our next presenter is Mina Broussard, Hospital Employees Union.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples. My pronouns are she and her. HEU is BC's largest healthcare union. We represent more than 50,000 members in healthcare, working for public, nonprofit, and private employers. I wanted to start on this day of truth and reconciliation by acknowledging the legacy of colonialism and the reality of discrimination and racism faced by Indigenous people, including Indigenous healthcare workers in the hospitals, care homes, and other sites where care is provided. We may believe that healthcare facilities are places of compassion and care for all, but in reality, this is not the experience of many Indigenous people. Dr. Turpel Lafon's unflinching 2020 investigation into these matters makes this reality very clear, and her report, In Plain Sight, provides us with a roadmap on how to systemically take on the work of decolonializing healthcare. I want to recognize the work that the Ministry of Health has done to support this work, and we strongly urge this committee to ensure resources are available over the long term to widely implement Dr. Turpel Lafon's recommendations. We are also committed to this important work. During the pandemic, healthcare workers have been unwavering in their dedication to provide the best quality care to patients, to residents, and clients while facing risk to themselves and their families. But it has been a long 19 months, and it has taken its toll on a workforce that was already facing crushing workloads prior to the pandemic. We recently surveyed our members, and nearly 1 out of 4 said they are more likely to consider leaving healthcare in the next 2 years because of their experience working in the pandemic. 40% have worked at a COVID outbreak site. About 1 in 20 have been infected with COVID-19. They're working a lot of overtime, they're burnt out, and they're physically exhausted. Simply put, we have a serious staffing crisis in healthcare, and it has the potential of getting much worse. We need to do more to make healthcare an attractive career choice and keep skilled and experienced workers in the system. This means making significant investments in supporting their mental health, and that's now and in the months and years to come. And we need to treat the healthcare workforce as a whole. And that means following through on the Minister of Health's mandate to standardize wages and benefits in long-term care and assisted living across all ownership types to promote equity and to reduce turnover. Recently, government announced that it was repatriating the work of thousands of privatized hospital cleaning and dietary staff and reuniting them with the rest of the healthcare team. Actions like this are life-changing for the workers and create good jobs that promote the retention of a skilled and experienced workforce that is so critical of a healthcare delivery. We also need to expand on career laddering opportunities to all workers across employer types without loss of service and corresponding benefits. Without these steps, we will continue to lose workers and healthcare will suffer. We commend the government for its commitment to applying gender-based analysis to policy decisions and to make sure we have a healthcare workforce that better represents our communities. We're very proud of the work we are doing with health employers to apply these principles in broader recruitment and retention strategies. For example, we're pushing for the gathering of baseline data to identify how Indigenous and racialized workers and other equity groups are currently represented with the healthcare team. We urge the committee to support initiatives like this and others that seek to transform our healthcare workforce. Finally, I want to thank the committee for its commitment to making investments and addressing gaps in seniors' care in past reports. Some of the recommendations you've made, like equalizing compensation in seniors' care, were put to work as part of our government's pandemic response. The provincial government leveled up wages across the sector as part of the single-site staffing orders, an important measure that saved lives and prevented an even more dire staffing crisis for low-wage operators. Under this arrangement, more than 60% of contracted care home owners have now, under the single-site order, raised their wages to the provincial standard. It's a government subsidy to low-paying employers worth about $165 million a year. And for many workers that we represent, This boosted their pay by as much as $8 an hour. 20 years ago, such actions would have been unnecessary. Virtually all funded long-term care operators, regardless of ownership type, were covered by a common collective agreement with wage and benefit parity across the sector. And coming out of the pandemic, we need to return to stability by reestablishing common labor standards in seniors' care. This will ensure continuity of care, help deal with the recruitment and retention crisis that we face, and provide a level playing field for both residents and workers when it comes to working and caring conditions. We've addressed a number of these issues related to health, human resources, improving seniors' care, and advancing employment equity in a written submission we've provided to this committee. So I wanted to say thank you for taking the time. Those are our comments from the Hospital Employees Union.
Thank you, Mina. And I'll now invite members of the committee to ask questions, and it looks like Mike has a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mina, for that very thorough, well-spoken report. Can you just tell us, with regards to long-term care, the wages that have come up, and working multiple sites, does that cover absolutely everybody in the system, that there's no loopholes for somebody that's a member to, go around that system to get into another site?
At the current time, that's correct. It does cover approximately 48,000 workers, and all the healthcare unions worked extremely hard to implement the single site agreement at the very beginning of the pandemic. And I really want to thank and commend everyone who worked so hard to get that in place within 30 to 40 days of the announcement.
Okay, thank you.
Harwinder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mina. First of all, I would like to say congratulations on this role.
Thank you.
And you and HEU, you're doing a good job, I can say, because I have two proud HEU members in my family. And when you're talking about these challenges, I know firsthand that 16-hour shifts are new normal, and versus having 4 days off, it's one at times, and that's because Interior Health's fatigue policy. Otherwise, they'll have them 7 days a week. And the impact, the mental health, it's more like comment. You mentioned that some of the new measures are taken even in residential school pay quality. What kind of response are you getting from members? Because being a healthcare advocate, I always believe and highly always say that healthcare and seniors care should never be for profit, because we've seen and we know when it comes to privatization, it's all about profit before people. So I wonder, with some recent changes and with the amalgamation of your members to the public sector, what kind of response are you? It is definitely a life-changing for many. I've heard from many. So I wonder what kind of response you're getting. Thank you.
So around the repatriation, again, a lot of the workers that were impacted were women and women of color. So their wages are going to go up significantly, and they're going to get the benefits and pension that was really taken away from them 20 years ago by the Liberal government. So they are going to have family supporting jobs, which is huge. And I get emotional thinking about that because, again, coming from a family with immigrant parents and the struggle that they faced, I feel that impact on what these workers have faced. And we've always taken the position that we need to end contracting out. And when it comes to long-term care and assisted living, we've seen the studies that show that the funding that goes into the for-profit sectors, we're not seeing all the funding going into the hours for care, that we're seeing less funding going into that and more money going into the pockets of these privateers. And for the not-for-profits and the long-term care and assisted living facilities that are funded through the health authorities, we're seeing more hours direct to patient care. So again, we need to end the privatization and make sure we have standardized level wages and benefits for all workers, and make sure that they all have the same safety measures in place.
Thank you. Very quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So after this announcement, I got a call from somebody. They live in Salmon Arm, and she told me, she said, in a moment, we were told that you're back to minimum wage and she lost all her benefits, pension. Like I was only thinking privatization, wasn't thinking the impact. And this person shared her stories how ever since I never had stable employment, and despite going to school for some, like it was just many heart-wrenching stories. So thank you for the advocacy that you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not seeing any other indications anyone wants to ask any further questions. So, Mina, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank you so much for your presentation and your recommendations, and thank your members for the work that they do. And as you were making your presentation, I was reminded, it was quite early in the pandemic, one of your members who lives in my community, who came off of a 12-hour shift, and before she went back on her next 12-hour shift, she went and stood in line at Costco so that she could buy groceries to contribute to the food bank. And that is so above and beyond. It was so generous, and it's important that her community repay that generosity with our own and make sure that she gets to work and live in the dignity she's entitled to. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And our next presenter is Becca Yu, Citadel Speech and Language Services. So Becca, you have 5 minutes. We will indicate to you when you have 30 seconds left so that you can start wrapping it up, and then you'll have 5 minutes for us to ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. I would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. As stewards of this beautiful place, we give thanks to this shared land, and in partnership we strive to enrich the lives and life chances of our youth so that they may reach their fullest potential, and this we give thanks. My name is Becca Yu, and I'm the owner of Citadel Speech and Language Services. I'm also the Vice President of Speech and Hearing BC. I'm here to talk today about my experiences as a healthcare professional. I've been a speech-language pathologist for over 10 years, and I started my career working in public health, providing early intervention. At the time, the wait lists were long, and many children didn't receive adequate services before they aged out. Now, more than 10 years later, unfortunately, not much has changed. Before COVID, families waited months, if not over a year, to receive services. Now, as a private practitioner, I receive many calls from families who've been waiting, and with the reduced services due to the pandemic, the wait times continue to grow. Between the ages of 0 to 5 are a critical development period for speech and language skills, and the time spent waiting for therapy is a loss of opportunities that may never be recovered, even with later intervention. The inability to access early intervention can have lifelong impacts. I urge the government to increase the early intervention funding, to hire more FTEs, to decrease the backlog of many years of underfunding and the reduction of services due to the ongoing pandemic. According to Speech and Hearing BC, the professional association for SLPs and audiologists, approximately 500 FTEs are needed to meet the current 0 to 5 population. There's currently about 175 FTEs for SLPs in this province. Before becoming an SLP, I worked with a sweet little autistic boy who I met when he was 3 years old. He's now a young adult and in university. According to the message his mother sent me at his high school graduation, early intervention was essential for where he is today. Throughout my career, I've worked with many autistic individuals and their families, and I've worked as part of a private non-BCAN assessment team for much of my career, and I continue to work with private assessment clinics to provide my expertise as part of the speech and language assessment. According to the PHSA website, as of April 21st this year, the wait time for a BCAN assessment was 78.7 weeks. That's 1.5 years. And this wait time continues to grow, meaning many families go over 1.5 years before finding out whether their child is autistic, and then given recommendations to support their needs. For many, the diagnosis and the subsequent funding is the only way to afford the services to support those needs. This is actually the best case scenario. I've worked with many families who waited for the assessment only to not be diagnosed as autistic, and families scramble for the next steps as they're unsure of how to support their child and now don't have any funding to support the needs that their child still has. That's about 50% of families going through the BCAN assessment. Now imagine waiting 1.5 years only to be told to keep looking for answers and there's no funding to support their needs. The provincial government needs to triage the incoming referrals with screening tools to reduce the wait times and provide recommendations and funding to support families of non-autistic children. As a pediatric SLP, I see children between the ages of 0 to 19. From my experience, families of school-age children have difficulties accessing services via public schools. And from my colleagues in the schools, I've heard now how difficult it is to manage the very large caseloads. This leads to burnout for healthcare professionals and a lack of services for students. Without adequate speech and language services at schools, students suffer not only academically but socially, reducing their quality of life and eroding the foundation of skills needed for life, such as literacy and numeracy skills that are needed for basic independent living, such as reading application forms or paying their bills. I'm asking the provincial government to increase funding for FTEs and the restructuring of services for better access to patients and better retention of SLPs in early intervention, in autism assessment services, and school-age speech and language services. Early intervention can reduce the number of government supports needed later in life, therefore reducing overall costs to taxpayers. Increasing funding and FTEs means more manageable caseloads, therefore reducing burnout of speech-language pathologists, which increases the retention of healthcare professionals. Overall, funding for the essential service of speech-language pathology is severely underfunded, and there needs to be a change for the health of British Columbians. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Becca. I'll now invite members of the committee to ask their questions. Your group.
Thank you, Rebecca, for coming today to make this important presentation. So you mentioned that we need 500 new FTEs to serve the full, to provide the services to the full, complete number of people, right? Students available in this sector. Do you have a wait list of children and how big is that one?
My own wait list?
For 500.
I don't have numbers for a wait list. I could try to get you those numbers if that would be helpful. Just to clarify, the 500 FTEs would be the total FTEs based on our calculation of the number of population between 0 to 5, and approximately 10% of children require some sort of speech and language support. That's how we've come to the conclusion for those numbers. We're also basing those numbers off of a reasonable caseload of about 40 children, which is actually quite unusual.
So these 500 FTEs are in addition to 175 or?
No, the 175 are included in the 500.
Oh, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Becca. It seemed like a long time ago, but it was yesterday morning that Stacey Cooper met with us and gave us a similar presentation. But I'll ask the same question. The system that we have in place today to recruit the number of FTEs that were going to be required, how long do you think that would take to find those people?
Honestly, I haven't done the calculation, but I think it would be a long one. You know, there's a number of factors. We don't have enough seats at the university level for our master's program, because that is what's required to become a speech-language pathologist. And then the other aspect around here in the Lower Mainland, how expensive it is to live here, as well as how expensive it is to register for our college, is actually a huge deterrent, both for those UBC students to stay and for the other schools across the country to attract SLPs to come into the province. So I don't have an answer to your question, but it is something that is not an easy answer.
Follow up. With your personal experience, with your personal practice, how difficult is it to retain people here in Metro Vancouver?
I've worked for 6 years for a company, and then now for myself for another 2 years. And it is difficult to recruit, incredibly difficult. I usually will put out something year-round, and if I speak to an individual that I feel is a good fit, I will be hiring, even if I'm not quite ready yet, both when I worked for a company and now, in order to obtain the number of SLPs needed in order to sustain and keep them for retention. There's so many deciding factors that can come into play, which, you know, as much as a salary job sometimes is great, and I've worked for many years that way, there's a sense of not having autonomy that a lot of my colleagues go into private practice for. And it is the sense of being able to make your own schedule and to be able to do other things in life to maintain our mental health while working such a difficult job. And, you know, so I think it's, sorry, I don't know if I'm answering your question. There's just, you know, a lot of reasons why it's very hard to retain people, because not everyone has the same motivating factors. You know, some people want that salaried position, they want the stability, other people need the flexibility, depending on what their life circumstances are.
Okay, good, thank you.
With that, on behalf of the committee, Becca, I'd like to thank you so much for taking time out of what must be a very busy schedule to come and share this with us. I don't know if you would find it reassuring to know that you are not the first one who's presented to this committee to raise the flag on this very important issue. And I think we all, probably all of us, know anecdotally the seriousness of this deficit, and have met absolutely frantic parents who know what you're telling us, that without early intervention, the lifelong impact can be very, very serious for the family, for society, for the individual. So thank you for raising this, and I guess we all have to put our heads together in terms of how to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And our next presenter is Dr. Zara Gerritsen, BC Chiropractic Association.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. It's so nice to be able to meet here in person today. It's been a long time since we've been able to do so. My name is Dr. Zara Gerritsen. I am the chair of the BC Chiropractic Association, and we represent 1,160 or more than 85% of the chiropractors in BC. My own practice is in Maple Ridge, but our members are available in every BC community, including rural and remote areas. And those areas are often underserved by healthcare providers. Approximately 1 million British Columbians visit a chiropractor every year, and it's quite likely that someone you know or maybe even you have benefited from our care. Chiropractors are experts in pain management, specifically spine, muscle, and joint pain management, as well as rehabilitation. What I want to discuss with you today is the crisis in our province and how chiropractors can help mitigate it, a crisis of both opioid overuse, deaths, and chronic pain. As you all are so aware, the number of overdose deaths continue to climb. But did you know that almost half of those who died sought healthcare services for pain management prior to their death? Substance use and untreated chronic pain are interconnected. People who use substances point to the lack of accessible, effective pain care as a contributor to substance use and impediment to successful treatment and recovery. Of particular concern is the opioid use among the trades. As many as 75% of workers in the construction industry experience musculoskeletal pain, which puts them at use for risk of substance use. The coroner's service tells us that most of the overdose deaths are among men from age 30 to 59, which are men in the prime of their lives. This is really sad. We also know from research here in BC that the most common comorbidity is low back pain for those who receive long-term opioid prescriptions. Research studies have demonstrated an inverse association between chiropractic use and opioid receipt among patients with spinal pain. For example, chiropractic users had 64% lower odds of receiving opioid prescription than non-users. Other studies have shown that patients who received initial treatment from a chiropractor had decreased odds of both short and long-term opioid use. And just as pain and opioids intersect, so do pain and poverty. The prevalence of chronic pain is higher in populations affected by social inequity, racism, and poverty, and they experience greater barriers to care. Pain may itself be a disability. Many drug-free pain management services are unfunded by public health, severely limiting access by marginalized and vulnerable populations. The allied health coverage offered by MSP's Supplementary Benefits program has not been increased for 2 decades. The $23 per visit fee does not cover the overhead costs of a practice, so patients must pay out of pocket, which they cannot afford. And 10 visits per year for all allied health providers combined is insufficient for people living in chronic pain. Addressing this issue will help reduce the financial barriers faced by vulnerable populations who are at most risk for opioid use and addiction. Again, research in BC has shown that those in the lowest income quintile had a dispensing level of long-term opioids that was consistently 3 times that of the highest income quintile. This has serious implications for the most vulnerable people in our province. BC chiropractors want to be part of the solution and to contribute to managing the chronic pain of British Columbians. And chiropractors have the expertise and capacity to provide necessary care for musculoskeletal complaints that do not require medical attention. The BC Chiropractic Association recommends that to improve access to effective chronic pain management services, the government fund initiatives with primary care networks in 9 to 10 communities in BC. This would be 2 in each health authority. To provide public funding for chiropractors to treat, manage, and prevent chronic pain conditions, particularly for vulnerable populations with low income. And to help mitigate the opioid crisis and improve access to drug-free pain management services for low-income people in BC, the government increased the number of MSP supplementary benefit visits to 20 per year and increased the visit fee to $53, which would be in alignment with current ICBC and WorkSafe BC fees paid to chiropractors. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerritsen. And I will now invite, we've got lots of questions. Megan and then Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I was looking through the submission you put in, and I see you have some interest in some pilot studies, as you mentioned, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a bit more about that and specifically any locations that you've been looking at. Thank you.
So ideally, the pilot study would put chiropractors in all 10 health authorities, so 2 clinics in each health authority, maybe 1 in Northern Health, but hopefully 2 in all health authorities.
Thank you so much.
Greg and then Ben.
Thank you very much. Well, for an individual that relies on chiropractor on a regular basis, I certainly know how debilitating it can be when you have chronic pain associated with, for me, it's in my shoulders and neck. But in any event, the correlation that you're presenting with respect to those that suffer with chronic pain and the use of opioids, and the other correlation, I guess, or the stretch or the reach that it's also leading to the potential or contributing to the number of opioid deaths in our province. Can you just share more specifically, is there any specific research that you can identify that actually shows that correlation? And I think, it certainly appears that your presentation, you're looking for, reduced costs and increased access for British Columbians. And so, maybe you could just share a little bit more about where that information is coming from.
I don't have the research studies on me right now. I can have them sent over for sure. I don't have them on me right now.
Okay. But, I certainly have have talked to individuals. I have individuals that work for me in one of my companies, those that have chronic pain, and we certainly have seen some challenges with, I guess, the lack of access for pain medication doctors. It's harder to get in to see them now, and and I have experienced directly with some employees that work with me increased incidence of, I guess, self-medicating, and so. I guess to the point that you're raising, we have seen, out of control opioid deaths around the province. It's tragic. It's had a significant impact, and so it's interesting you're raising the point that increased access to chiropractic care can help to alleviate reliance on opioids.
Absolutely. And it would help take pressure off of the current healthcare system too. There's long waits to get into family physicians. A lot of people will contact their family physician first if they're in pain, whether it's acute or chronic, more often chronic pain, and that really backlogs the system. So hopefully with this pilot study, if we can have increased access to chiropractic care for those chronic pain populations, it would take pressure off of the family physicians, and chiropractors would be that first line contact, at least so we could triage those patients and hopefully help them if they did need more serious medical attention. Of course, referral, but hopefully we could reduce some of that pressure on the system and decrease those costs.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thanks very much, Dr. Grietzen. I have to say that this information is quite striking, and I certainly didn't realize, first of all, that you could deal with all these pain management issues in a natural way versus, and I can't imagine somebody prescribing opioids if there was an alternative. And we had a presentation just while we were on this tour recently about a primary care network, which is very successful working in Burnaby, but I don't think I know that the minister's talked a lot about it. So I guess I kind of see a disconnect here, like doctors, I don't know their kind of understanding of what you do and, the pain management, but why is it that you're not part of the primary care networks, or maybe you are? Are you part of them, or why are you not part?
We are actively working with members of government to integrate chiropractors into the team-based primary care settings. That's one of our primary goals through the association, and also a big desire of pretty much every chiropractor in the province. We have talked to the doctors of BC a few times, and they have directed us to build support in local communities through divisions of family practice. So we've been meeting at the grassroots level with MLAs, a few ministers. I would love to meet with Minister Adrian Dix as well, but he is a bit busy right now, which is understandable. So we have been spreading information and the ways that chiropractors can contribute and be part of those primary care networks. So that is the goal, and we're working very hard on it.
Well, thank you. Anyways, this is new information. Anything more of those studies that you have or whatever that you mentioned to MLA Kylo, I think would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
Anything to get down the opioid deaths, that's
Absolutely.
what I would say.
Thank you.
Well, we're out of time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you've certainly piqued our interest and offered some solutions to a crisis that plagues our society. And I think I really want to echo the Deputy Chair's question, because that was what was going through my mind, is how do we get chiropractors as part of the team-based medicine that is happening and being promoted in our community. So I think this is something that we will go back and ask some questions ourselves.
Awesome.
What you say makes so much sense.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
And our final presenter of the morning is Roland Orfaley, BC Anesthesiologists Society.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to present this morning. I'm sure that the committee has already done this, but since I haven't been here all morning, I just did want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and I also work at Peace Arch Hospital, which specifically is in the unceded territory of the Semiahmoo First Nation. So my name is Dr. Roland Orfali, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the British Columbia Anesthesiologists Society. And it's my honor to present on behalf of that organization, which actually represents over 400 consultant specialist anesthesiologists in the province, as well as over 100 family practice anesthesiologists across particularly rural BC. And it's actually those family practice anesthesiologists, or what we call FPAs, who are actually the generators of the idea and the work of the proposal I'm going to put before you today. But first, as a bit of background, the consultant anesthesiologist after medical school complete a minimum of 5 years of in-depth training so that they can provide the highest level of safe anesthetic care to British Columbians. And for FPAs, or family practice anesthesiologists, after medical school, they have a minimum of 3 years of in-depth residency training and provide very unique and critical skills to the rural population of the province. Because every general anesthetic involves life support, involves intubating patients, putting them on ventilators. Those are skills that FPAs have in their communities that are rarely available otherwise. And so particularly during this COVID pandemic, I can tell you that the FPAs have provided a critical role in not just giving anesthetics, but in terms of resuscitating COVID patients, intubating them, putting them on ventilators, and caring for them. So FPAs have been essential in our response to COVID over the last year and a half. But as I said, they also provide critical anesthetic care to rural British Columbians, and they are actually the ones who've generated the proposal I'm going to bring forward to increase surgical capacity and to reduce wait times for surgery. And as context, I've presented at this committee several times over the years, and I'm on record as saying that it's not so much about how much funding is given for healthcare, but how that funding is allocated to effectively generate the results that are intended. And that's exactly the focus of the proposal that I have for you today. About a year ago, just after the first wave of COVID, Minister Adrian Dix announced the allocation of $250 million to increase surgical capacity and reduce wait times. And that was excellent news. During health estimates earlier this year, however, he reported that there was an increase of 1% in surgical capacity over that first fiscal year. And I know that COVID has made things difficult, but I'm sure that we can all look forward to even better than a 1% increase in surgical capacity, which is about 2,000 to 3,000 extra cases per year for the entire province. And in fact, the proposal I bring to you today will multiply that by more than 6. And what I'm speaking about is surgery closer to home. That's where patients would prefer to have their health care. And it's also where we have the most capacity to expand the delivery of surgery. The space in our public hospitals in smaller and rural communities is available. And we have the anesthesiologist available to care for those patients. So as I said, our network of family practice anesthesiologists, FPAs, have identified 16 smaller and rural hospitals that have capacity to do more surgery and to deliver it closer to home. On average, that capacity can increase by about 59% over the current baseline. A conservative estimate of what that actually means for the number of surgeries is about 16,650 more surgeries in 1 year. And that's by increasing scheduled operating room hours from the current 752 hours per week across those 16 hospitals to 1,196 hours. So what's needed? Like I said, we have the space and we have the anesthesiologists. Every hospital is different. One place may need just to hire a new surgeon. Another place may need to retrain nurses or buy the surgical equipment and supplies that are needed. And we feel that that can be allocated from within the $250 million that has already been promised. So in summary, we can reduce surgery wait times. We can do it within our current space and with our current supply of anesthesiologists. We can do it closer to home, and we can do it by allocating funding and attention to where it can deliver the best results for British Columbians. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Megan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I have two questions that are interconnected. So there was a budget allocation. It's whatever percentage of that $250 million that was spent saw an increase of 1%. And there are 16 hospitals that could increase capacity that are not presently being used. What do you know, or do you think you might be able to shed some light on what the obstacles beyond what you've mentioned, which might be, some retraining, could be to not have already attempted to implement this already? And will you be putting in a written submission?
So I'll speak to that last point first, and I apologize I haven't put forward a written proposal, but I will do so this afternoon, so you'll have more details in that. And it lists specifically each of the 16 hospitals, the potential capacity. And it's actually that FPA network that we have who can speak to each individual site and what is needed at each site. And what they're telling us and what we've reported to the Ministry of Health is that each hospital may just need one more surgeon or a couple more nurses or just the funding to actually buy the supplies for that surgery. So it is quite variable, but it's not insurmountable challenges.
And it just hasn't been tried to this point.
We've seen no indication that it's being implemented. We've seen a lot of efforts in the larger hospitals in larger communities.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to your written submission. Thank you for your verbal one today.
Thank you.
So there's three more people have indicated that they have questions, and we've got about less than 3 minutes left. So Je Group, Harwinder, and Ben.
Just very quickly, Roland, in the same question as my colleague here. So the 16 hospitals you're talking about, so they, as I understand your presentation, so you have the space, you have the some HR capacity, but some HR capacity is missing, like nurses and surgeons. So, but do they have a complete infrastructure, otherwise equipment and all that?
So what we're saying is that they have the operating room space, and usually if you have the operating room space, you have the major equipment. You have an anesthetic machine, you have the carts, you have the stretchers, all of those things. What you might need are the disposables, the specific things that are bought for each particular surgery. And yes, there are HR issues at some of those hospitals, but they're, like I said, they're not insurmountable. We have surgeons willing to do more surgery. We just need to connect them with the hospitals that need them.
It seems to me a very creative thinking, so you should submit your written submission to us and also to the ministry.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Harwinder.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. O'Falley. I really appreciate your presentation. So the quick question, you identified those 16 smaller hospitals, and I'm curious, are they in different regions of province? And the other thing I know in our region or area that we've seen uptick in surgeries after that announcement, but recently with the COVID cases rising in the interior, I was talking to one of my former colleague or anesthesiologist. They were saying that now they had to spare and open the operating room when ICUs were full with COVID patients. How much impact did that have? Which we all know it did have impact when they had to be prepared for any additional COVID case who may need ventilator. My curiosity about the nurses, I know interior health authorities do fund that program, and there is a lot of interest in the nursing. People who were doing a lot shift work, they're curious they're excited to move to the operating room nursing. So maybe something, if you can share some ideas in your written submission, how can we perhaps look into the way to fund additional nurses to do give them incentive to do this specialty training? That would be really appreciated.
Sure, that's a great idea. And I'll just speak very quickly to the first part, that in our proposal it'll list the 16 hospitals. They run across Vancouver Island, the Northern Health and Interior Health. which is where our smaller and rural hospitals are. And that is a wonderful idea in terms of retraining the nurses with some, encouragement from the system. That would be great.
Thank you. Ben.
Dr. O'Falley, I want to commend you for the out-of-the-box type of thinking that your group has brought. It's just the same as the primary care networks we were talking about. I know that the minister is open to, new ideas on this, and I think that your presentation is very important because I think that they want to resolve these the surgeries that are, and if it's, I don't know the whole reasons, etc., operating theaters and all those type of things, but by putting a different lens on it and getting to the solution about getting those done is really important. And I look forward to seeing your written presentation.
Thank you. Maybe just to give you a practical idea of what we're talking about, for example, some hospitals might have an operating room running 2 days a week, but there's capacity to run that 5 days a week.
Right.
So these are, certainly not insurmountable challenges to increase capacity. So, thank you again.
Well, thank you, Dr. O'Falley. On behalf of the committee, what a wonderful way to wrap up a morning of presentations. I think you've given us all a lot of hope.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will now recess.